Chapter 806. In the roar, the Abbey Dean came to Ning, Quebec. Every step on the snow street was stained with blood. Julien cut off the Rainbow Bridge, and eldest brother held his feet. He could not leave Chang and city by air, so he had to take Ning K's blade. At this moment, he was as miserable as a sinner who had been sentenced to death by dismemberment. He was covered with blood and bones, but he still thought he could take the blade. The Abbey Dean was still flying like an immortal, a white bone immortal. He pointed at the blade. He looked solemn, like a king of the divine kingdom walking in the human world. His aura suddenly changed and became extremely awe-inspiring. An aura colder than the abyss and lonelier than death passed from his fingertips to the blade of the iron cutlass. In an instant, the blade was covered with a layer of frost. What a strong aura of quietus! The vermilion bird let out an angry roar and spewed out endless flames to fight against the quietus. The front end of the iron cutlass was colder than ice, emitting a terrifying quietus aura. It was covered with frost, while the other end near Ning K's right hand was extremely hot, emitting flames to the outside world. Two extreme auras were making the most dangerous resistance on such a simple and plain cutlass. No one knew if the iron cutlass would be frozen into scrap iron or burn all the quietus in the world in the next moment. At this moment, a clear sound was heard in the hurricane that the iron cutlass stirred up on the snow street. It was the sound of metal objects colliding, and then more and more colliding sounds were heard. The wind of the cutlass swept through the street and surged between the streets and markets. No one knew how many things were rolled up, such as iron pots, broken gongs, and musical instruments like flutes. The gongs were hit by stones, the thick iron pots hit the walls, and the flutes started to whimper due to the wind. There were lively sounds in the dim wind, and no one knew who was having a wedding or a funeral. With these sounds, the frost on the front end of the iron cutlass disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye, while the flame spewed by the vermilion bird cut toward the Abbey Dean along the blade. The quietus was broken by the bustle of the human world. The fierce wind set up by the iron cutlass turned the vermilion bird avenue into the storm sea in the east of the Song Kingdom. The Abbey Dean's quietus aura was broken, and his indigo robe fluttered in the wind. He stood up ostentatiously, and his body seemed to become countless times bigger. An aura as vast and boundless as the sea appeared on the snowy street. The Abbey Dean used the boundless sea of the Buddhism sect again. The pain of being dismembered made him very clear that if he only used the boundless state of the Buddhism sect, it would not be enough to resist the knife in Ning K's hand, because there were thousands of knives. Therefore, he used the Divine Demon Realm at the same time. The Divine Demon Realm was a unique skill of the Devil's Doctrine. Apart from Julien, only the Abbey Dean knew it. Apart from making the body of a cultivator stronger than steel, more importantly, it could create a new world, or in other words, a false world. What would happen if the Buddhist sect's Limitless and the Devil's sect's Sky Demon Realm were used at the same time? Dean. Ning K came to the coast of the East Sea and stood on the seawall that stretched for miles. The East Sea Causeway of the Kingdom of Song was very famous. He didn't look at the strangely shaped rocks under his feet. Instead, he looked silently at the seemingly boundless sea outside the causeway. There were countless storms in the depths of the sea. The seawater nearby was stirred like ink, with a chilling sense of danger. Waves as high as a 10-story building were set off in the distance. Ning K did not slash at the waves. Because the Abbey Dean was not a storm. The storm came from his iron cutlass. The Abbey Dean was the sea. No matter how terrible the storm was, it could never destroy the sea itself. The vermilion bird chirped in the gloomy sky. Holding a small stone in its mouth, the little red bird flew to the depths of the sea against the storm. No matter how violent the storm was, it could not be stopped. The vermilion bird became a little black dot in the sky. It took the small stone in its mouth and threw it into the sea. The stone fell into the raging sea and was swallowed instantly. It did not even make a noticeable splash. The vermilion bird was not discouraged. It chirped and flew back to the shore. Holding another stone in its mouth, it flew to the depths of the sea against the storm. The bird shuttled back and forth between the gloomy sky and the raging sea. Behind the seawall, more than half of a mountain had collapsed. At the foot of the mountain, there were people hammering at the rocks. The hard rocks were smashed to the size of the vermilion bird's mouth. There were many people smashing stones, so many that it was hard to count. Many of them came from the Wa mountain. In recent years, they had smashed the collapsed Buddha statues into countless small Buddha statues and sold them to tourists. They were good at this kind of thing. Human beings were good at this kind of thing. Human beings were good at cutting mountains and smashing all the hard things in the world. Behind the sea wall, the dull sound of smashing stones kept ringing for many days and nights. People smashed stones tirelessly, and the vermilion bird flew back and forth between the sea and the land tirelessly. Countless small stones were thrown into the sea by the vermilion bird. This was reclamation. The sea was immeasurable. But as long as it kept filling, it would be filled up one day. The immeasurable was broken by the immeasurable of the human world. The Abbey Dean became a barren field. The most powerful person in Taoism for thousands of years would not die so easily. But he was only one step away from death, or returning to Haotian's divine kingdom. If he could not resist Ning Kei's thousands of cuts, then everything would be over. The Abbey Dean had looked down on the world all his life and had rarely felt the shadow of death. He was defeated by Kuharan's sword once. He was hit by the headmaster's wooden stick once. But even these 2 times, he survived and went further on the path of cultivation. Only the great fear between life and death could give a person like the Abbey Dean a chance to understand Tao. Today, he saw the abyss between life and death again in front of Ning Kei's blade. Could he understand something? The Abbey Dean looked at Ning Kei with a very strange expression on his face. It was not indifferent regret, nor anger. It had nothing to do with unwillingness. It was not an expression that a human should have. It was extremely calm and showed indifference. The deepest part of the indifference was not coldness, but emptiness. There was no emotion. An emotionless expression should not be called an expression. But Ning Kei felt that it was, and he was very vigilant. There was no emotion in the Abbey Dean's eyes, and even his pupils gradually faded. It was not faint like when he used the grey eyes, but really faint. The Abbey Dean's eyes were so faint that they were almost transparent. They were no longer jade, but tasteless water. Then he suddenly retracted his fingers. Ning Kei's iron cutlass fell down. Before the blade arrived, the wind had already started raging. His black hair danced in the wind, and blood scattered in the wind. The flesh that peeled off from his body was as red as flower petals. The ghastly white bones were as clean as lotus roots. The scene that should have been bloody looked extremely beautiful at this moment. He turned into a lotus. The blood could not be stained, and the dirt could not cover. It was extremely peaceful. It was extremely peaceful. The broken rainbow floated down from the blue sky and finally landed on the street. Some of them fell on the Abbey Dean, which suddenly glowed with golden jade and then slid off. These rainbow fragments were the remnant aura of Tianqi. But somehow, the power given by Haotian could not be integrated into the Abbey Dean's flesh and blood. The connection between the Abbey Dean and Haotian seemed to be broken. He seemed to have disappeared from heaven and earth, turning into snow and flowers that escaped. He was so independent and so untouchable. Looking at this scene, Yu Lian suddenly raised her eyebrows. Eldest brother said incredulously, "The state of pureness? The next chapter will be broken, but I don't know when it will be written. Anyway, it will be written. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. calm to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 807. The state of pureness was said to be the most unfathomable state in Hautian Taoism, but no one had ever seen it, not even in the history of cultivation after the last everlasting night. For the real powerhouses in this world, there was one question that they were most curious about: how high was the headmaster of the academy? Master Qishan of the Lank Temple once guessed that the headmaster of the academy should be in the state of pureness. It could be imagined how high the state of pureness was in people's eyes. The headmaster of the academy proved his state in the wilderness, which was beyond everyone's imagination. But even he had never seen anyone enter the state of pureness in his long life. The eldest brother had never seen it either. His understanding of the state of pureness came from the scattered records in the books at the back of the mountain of the academy. It was only a guess that he shouted the words, "state of pureness." He felt that his guess should not be far from the truth. There was no other way to explain the Abbey Dean's change except for the legendary state of pureness. Ning Ke wrote that character, gathered the desire of thousands of people in Chang'an, borrowed thousands of knives, and was about to kill the Abbey Dean. But the Abbey Dean actually entered the state of pureness. The eldest brother could not believe that someone in this world could enter this legendary state. But it happened so vividly in front of him. The Abbey Dean was indeed the most powerful powerhouse in Hautian Taoism in 1,000 years, the only one below Hautian. Compared to the other states, the state of pureness was a higher state. It could be called peerless, because it could be separated from the world. When one entered the state of pureness, all the power in the world became an absolute foreign object to the cultivator. The clear and beautiful sunlight shone on the cliffs, and the green pine trees cast their shadows on the rocks. If a cool breeze blew, it would shake the pine trees, or it would blow away the dust on the rocks, but how could it blow away the shadows? At this time, the Abbey Dean's flesh and blood were the lotus petals, and his bones were the lotus joints. He was born in the clear water, not in the world. Ning Ke's iron cutlass was still in the world. How could it fall on him? The iron cutlass could break 3 of the 5 states, but how could it break the state of pureness? The iron cutlass had cut through the quietus, the immeasurable, and the divine demon realm. Ning Ke's fighting will and spirit were at their peak at this moment. The terrifying qi of heaven and earth in his body seemed to be about to burst out. Because he knew, he would think and worry. Eldest senior brother was like that now. But he knew nothing. He did not know why the Abbey Dean was floating and why he looked much cleaner. So he did not think. He only knew that he was going to hack him to death. His iron saber finally came down completely. The iron cutlass finally finished writing that character in the blue sky with a flame of more than 10 li. Everything on the Vermilion Bird Avenue was rolled up by his blade wind and attacked the Abbey Dean. There were silver ingots and gold bars from the Yamen storeroom, flowers and birds from the calligraphy and painting shop, powder and a dozen hairpins, and an old incense burner from a small Taoist temple. There were iron pots and broken gongs, overnight tea in a teapot, urine in a chamber pot, half-eaten buns, minced meat with the smell of scallions, and feces and urine in the sewers. No matter if it was beautiful or ugly, sweet or stinky, pleasing or disgusting, it was the human world. Ning Ke's cutlass had cut out all the aura of the human world, including the filth. Everything was mixed together and no longer had different properties. It was no longer fragrant or stinky. What was the difference between silver ingots and a chamber pot? What was the difference between feces and gold bars? The Vermilion Bird Avenue was raging and became extremely dark. The entire Chang'an became extremely dark and then gradually turned dark. It seemed that the night was coming. On the long street that seemed to be shrouded in darkness, dull sounds of collisions could be heard. The Abbey Dean was like a pure lotus with bright red petals and white stems, swaying in the wind. Countless things from the human world hit his body. Minced meat with the smell of scallions fell on his face and then fell down, leaving some frozen meat juice on his beard and a small piece of scallion. A gold bar hit heavily on his chest, causing the petal-like flesh to tremble slightly. Then a mark was left on the gold bar. It was the mark of the national treasury of the Tang Empire. A chamber pot flew past his right shoulder, spilling disgusting yellow urine. A box of cosmetic powder scattered in front of him, splashing on his snow-white face. The Abbey Dean's body was covered in blood and filth. 2 rotten vegetable leaves hung on his belt, and there were several clusters of feces on the wounds of his broken fingers. He had become very dirty, very dirty. Even if he had not entered the state of pureness, he had never been so dirty in his life. He had lived above the human world and traveled in the South Sea. His feet were not stained by dust, but now he was forced to be baptized by the human world and be contaminated by all the aura of the human world. The filth from the human world was not only outside the body, but also outside the heart. The Abbey Dean was still in the state of pureness, unharmed. As long as he could keep his Taoist heart peaceful, his body and mind would be clean. However, his body and mind were the same. If his body had been contaminated by the human world for a long time, how could his heart remain peaceful? After countless years, or even several everlasting nights, the legendary state of pureness finally appeared in the human world again. What a shocking scene it was! However, what was even more shocking was that as soon as the state of pureness reappeared in the human world, it met the most powerful opponent in the world, the human world itself. The lotus swayed in the black wind, as if it could wither or die at any time. The Abbey Dean continued to fight against Ning Quebec. No one knew the result of the battle between the peerless state of Taoism and the human world. Even Haotian did not know. Jiang Rui was the most famous ruffian in Sanyuanli. He was good at cheating and cheating, but he was timid. He was even worse than the most useless ruffians, so even the young people looked down on him. He had no fixed residence and wandered around, so he did not receive any notice from the imperial court. In the early morning, he was awakened by the ringing of bells all over the city, and then he heard many noises in the wind. Jiang Rui did not know that it was the Abbey Dean fighting against the academy. He did not even know what was going on in Chang'an. But when he found that the streets were empty and the government runners of Chang and local government who usually patrolled the streets were nowhere to be seen, his remaining doubts were immediately diluted by ecstasy. He went to the Lotus Pond to steal several bolts of embroidered cloth from the South Jin Kingdom. When he found that a yaman's warehouse had collapsed, he was about to pick up some silver, but he hesitated because of fear. Although he was a ruffian, like other Tangs, he felt that dignity was very important. So when he returned to the small yard, he felt ashamed of his previous cowardice. In order not to feel ashamed, he decided to do something that he had wanted to do for a long time. He took out a sharp knife and sneaked into the yard of Li Zheng's house, ready to stab the big yellow dog that had bitten him when he was young. More than a decade had passed since that incident, and the big yellow dog from back then had already become an old yellow dog. It did not have the power to resist at all, and it died as soon as Yangming stabbed it with the sharp knife. Jiang Rui even doubted whether the old yellow dog was stabbed to death by himself or died of old age. Anyway, he had accomplished what he wanted to do the most in his life. He carried the old yellow dog back to the small yard and began to peel and cut it into pieces. Then he lit the stove and prepared to cook a pot of dog meat. At this time, he heard a conversation coming from the street. He could not understand the conversation, but then he heard 2 young people crying. He recognized that one of them should be the cold-eyed boy from the Zhang family. Jiang Rui held the top of the wall with both hands and looked at the street. Then he roughly understood what was happening in Chang'an. He was very scared and hurried back to the yard. He stared blankly at the unboiled water in the pot and the dog meat on the chopping board for a while. He stabbed the sharp knife into the chopping board and poured the bloody dog meat into the pot of water. He pushed down the old and loose wall that had not been repaired for many years, picked up a dozen bricks and held them in his arms. Then, with great difficulty, he climbed up the wall again, took out a brick and threw it at the Taoist priest on the street. He thought it was safer this way. Thinking of the pot of dog meat, he was a little angry and felt sorry for the old yellow dog. So he cursed at the Taoist priest. "I'll smash you to death, son of a bitch." Jiang Rui died just like that. No one would ever know that he had fulfilled the biggest wish of his life today. No one would ever know that half of the wall in the small yard had collapsed and the dog meat was cooking in the pot. The Abbey Dean's quietus will shrouded the whole Chang'an. The firewood in the stove was frozen out and the water in the pot no longer heated up. The dog meat in the water continued to soak like that and a lot of blood came out. Ning Kai pulled out his padao from the snowy street. The sharp knife on the chopping board in the small yard jumped up. The blood on the knife was still fresh. The pot not far away was steaming. A word appeared in the blue sky. A gust of wind blew on the vermilion bird avenue. The world became extremely dark. Chang'an seemed to fall into the night ahead of time. The small yard was also in the dark. The black wind was very violent. It blew everywhere and broke the eaves in the marketplace. The remaining half of the wall in the small yard was also blown down. Even the dog meat pot on the stove was blown up. The dog meat pot was blown over the wall and onto the street. Then it fell on a person. It fell on the Abbey Dean. The pot of bloody dog meat was poured over the Abbey Dean's head. The blood and soup drenched his whole body. The dog meat fell on the Abbey Dean's broken body. If it were a lotus, the warm dog meat would be hanging on the petals. The petals were dripping with blood. The Abbey Dean's body was dirty, and then his heart was dirty. The peace of Taoism was finally broken by the secular world. The Abbey Dean's eyes were filled with confusion. "I'm going to kill you," Ning Kai said. His iron cutlass chopped on the Abbey Dean's left shoulder, his real body. Even though the state of peace was broken, the Abbey Dean's state of divine demon was extremely profound and almost immortal. So he chopped with great force. He bent his left knee slightly. The Haoran Qi was like a storm. Countless Qi of heaven and earth poured into the iron cutlass and dragged it down obliquely. It cut a horrible wound on the Abbey Dean's body. The pure lotus was rolled up by the black wind and gradually withered. Then the petals fell. Ning Kai's knife contained the vicissitudes of Chang'an for thousands of years and the desire of thousands of people. The Abbey Dean was directly chopped into dust and floated to the south of the long street. Blood spilled along the way. Hundreds of talismans in the streets of Chang'an fell on him again. Thousands of cutlasses in Chang'an city chopped on him at the same time. Under the dark night, in the wind of the cutlass. The Abbey Dean's 7 fingers fell like lotus roots. Then his legs left his body. His abdomen split open and his intestines were broken. The dog blood and feces entered the deepest part of his body and could not be washed away. A human-shaped hole appeared on the south city gate with a bang. The Abbey Dean flew out of Chang'an city. He wanted to leave Chang'an city since Ning Kai pulled out his cutlass, but not in this way. The black wind rolled up the Abbey Dean's body and continued to dance. The huge stones in the lake outside the south city gate were blown into a mess. Even the broken stone array tactics could not stop Ning Kai's cutlass wind. There was a lake 4 miles south of the city. The hurricane swept over and the lake water was rolled up like rain. The Abbey Dean's body fell heavily on the lakeside. The clean lake water fell down and washed away some of the filth on his body. A few fishes landed on the ground beside him, struggling with their tails. The hurricane created by Ning Kai's cutlass continued to move south. The lakeside gradually became quiet and the sky became clear. The Abbey Dean opened his eyes and looked at the blue sky. His lips moved slightly as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. He turned his head to look at the fish struggling in the puddle. The fish struggled for a while and finally accepted their fate and died. The Abbey Dean looked at the dead fish and seemed to understand something. The sound of footsteps came from the lakeside. Chen Pippi knelt down in front of him. Finally done. It's inappropriate not to ask for votes at this climax. That's why. Well, I admit it. Yun Kai said today is the Consumer Rights Day and asked me to ask for votes with this reason. I don't know how to object. I'm speechless. Anyway, let's vote if you want. I'm satisfied with this paragraph and I've used all the things I prepared. I'll start to finish the questions tomorrow. It might be updated later and there might only be one chapter. Enjoy your reading. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 808. The whole world had been fighting against the Tang Empire for several months. After the Abbey Dean was killed by Ning Kai, many changes had taken place. These changes might have been accidental, but some were inevitable. On the Xiangwan Plain in the north, more than 1,000 Tang soldiers had been fighting for their lives. At the moment when they thought they were going to die, they finally saw the dust from the south and the reinforcement cavalry. The situation of the battle suddenly changed. Thousands of Tang cavalrymen from the northern battlefront army rushed to the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court like an avalanche. Their cold blades took away countless heads in the silent sun. The battle finally came to an end. The blood-stained meadow turned the light from the sky red. The Padao in Situelan's hand had long been broken into 2 pieces. She wiped the blood off her face and looked around the battlefield. She found that most of her subordinates had died, but she and her team had finally won. Outside the verdant canyon in the south, it was the most dangerous moment. Jun Mo held the iron sword in his hand and looked exhausted. He was like the green mountains in late autumn, quiet and beautiful, but the yellow leaves were falling. The disciples of the back of the mountain of the academy stood behind him. Looking at the dust on the field and listening to the sound of the iron hooves, they were silent and waiting for the last moment. Mu Yu reached out and held Jun Mo's empty right sleeve. Fan Yu, the 4th brother, had been fighting against the Abbey Dean's virtual sword with the river and mountain sandbox with all his cultivation. At this time, even he struggled to walk out of the iron shelter. Since they were from the same sect, they should live and die together. The cavalry of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army came to the verdant canyon again. During the past 7 days, the disciples of the academy had defeated the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army many times. Both they and the Divine Hall Coalition Army were tired of this scene. It would be different this time. It would probably be the last time. At this moment, the 4th brother suddenly felt that the river and mountain sandbox in his hand had become much lighter. He sensed it and was shocked to find that the virtual sword could no longer be found in the sandbox. People in front of the verdant canyon did not know what had happened in Chang'an. But there was only one possibility that the Abbey Dean's virtual sword had disappeared. That was, the Abbey Dean was dead or disabled. 4th brother was well aware of the academy's preparations in Chang'an. He knew that his senior brothers, senior sisters and youngest brother were trying their best to kill the Abbey Dean, but he did not have much hope for it. Because he was good at calculation, he could not figure out how the academy could kill the Abbey Dean no matter how hard he tried. However, at this time, the virtual sword in the river and mountain sandbox disappeared without a trace. Whether he believed it or not, it showed that something must have happened in Chang'an City. He said in a hoarse voice, "The Abbey Dean has lost." His voice was hoarse not only because of the exhaustion he felt after enduring the phantom sword for several days, but also because of his irrepressible excitement and disbelief. Everyone in the academy heard this. Silence reigned. Suddenly, Junemo raised his iron sword and pointed it at the field, laughing out loud. Beigong Weiyang roared with laughter as he plucked at the strings of his zither. Shiman Buhua laughed out loud and slapped his palms with the flute. The sixth brother gave a simple and honest smile and held the iron hammer in his hand tighter. Wang Qi smiled faintly. The black flowers on his temples seemed to have gained some color. Teak Mu was a woman, so she didn't know how to be heroic. She didn't smile, but her eyes were wet. The cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army were right in front of them. However, the Academy's disciples did not seem to care. They laughed out loud and were extremely pleased. Their hearty laughter echoed in front of the verdant canyon and spread far away along the Green Mountains. Whether the Abbey Dean was dead or alive, and whether they could defend the verdant canyon or not, as long as Chang'an City was safe and sound, the Academy and the Tang Empire could keep the last hope. They had guarded the verdant canyon for 7 days with their lives. Wasn't it for the hope? And the hope was not lost. It was in their hands. To be more precise, it was in the hands of the fourth brother. Under the puzzled gaze of his fellow disciples, the fourth brother walked to the forefront. Looking at the cavalrymen coming like iron streams and the sword light looming in the air, he raised the river and mountain sandbox. The fourth brother's face became extremely pale, and his cheeks became much thinner. He poured all his psyche power into the river and mountain sandbox. The river and mountain sandbox was a sand table, which contained the finest yellow sand. There were rivers and mountains in the sandbox, and each grain of sand was a peak and a stone bridge in the great rivers and mountains. The yellow sand danced wildly in front of the verdant canyon. The sky was covered, and the field became extremely dark. The cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill rushed into the yellow sand, and then got lost. From time to time, there were shrill screams and the sound of heavy objects hitting each other. After a long time, the yellow sand gradually fell. The verdant canyon returned to peace, and there were many corpses of cavalrymen and horses in the field. The river and mountain sandbox could not change the fate of the disciples of the Academy. Because the Divine Hall Coalition Army was ready to charge again after a little reorganization. At this moment, a soldier of the Tang Empire suddenly walked out of the vast mountains. The soldier looked very embarrassed. His hair was unkempt and his face was dirty, and he was covered with mud. His armor had been thrown into the mountain stream, and his clothes were cut into strips by the thorns in the mountains. The soldier ran to the people of the Academy. He staggered all the way and almost fell several times. It could be seen that he was extremely tired, but he still ran and shouted. His voice was extremely hoarse, as if he had not drunk water for many days. But in the ears of the people of the Academy, it was as clear as the clearest spring water. Wang Wu of Group B of the Scout Battalion of the Southern Army is here to help. After saying this, the soldier of the Southern Army, who had arrived at the verdant canyon first, could no longer support himself and fell heavily on the field. He kept panting and could no longer stand up. Wang Qi walked to the Tang soldier's side and quickly felt his pulse. Junemo solemnly bowed to the most ordinary soldier of the Tang and said, "Thank you." An ordinary scout of the Tang army could not play any role in the situation in front of the verdant canyon. For the people of the Academy, the arrival of the Tang soldier meant a lot of things. The Academy was the Academy of the Tang Empire. The Tang Empire was the Tang Empire of the Academy. No one was fighting alone. Then, another soldier of the Tang Empire came out of the mountains. Then, more soldiers walked out of the mountains and came to the field. They supported each other and cheered for their companions. They were already exhausted. When they walked out of the verdant canyon, they sat down on the ground and could no longer stand up. Even if they picked up their weapons, they could not fight the enemy. There were even a few soldiers who suddenly relaxed and fell to the ground the moment they walked out of the mountains. For the well-trained soldiers of the Tang Empire, this was unimaginable. More and more soldiers continued to walk out of the mountains and came to the verdant canyon. After walking for several days and nights without rest, they finally reached this place. The Southern Army had arrived. That was enough. It was a tired army that appeared in front of the verdant canyon. But no one dared to deny that they were a mighty army. At this moment, the sound of gongs came from the field in the south. The cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army looked at the Tang Army in front of the verdant canyon with complicated expressions. Some were unwilling, some were in awe. Finally, they pulled the border ropes and returned to the camp. I was too high yesterday when I poured dog's blood on the Abbey Dean, so I am in low spirits today. Plus, I reported in advance yesterday that I have some family affairs to deal with, so I only have one chapter. But it is not appropriate to write less than 2,000 words. So I will write 7,000 words on Sunday. Have a good weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 809. The black wind caused by Ning Kei's blade had blown across the long street and cut the Abbey Dean black and blue all over. The Abbey Dean had fallen to the lakeside like a dead fish, but it did not stop there. Instead, it continued to head south. 2,000 elite cavalrymen were dozens of miles south of the city. They did not know what had happened in Chang'an and were still dreaming of killing and looting after entering the city. Only a few people in the West Hill Divine Palace knew the Abbey Dean's overall plan, but Long Qing was one of them. In a sense, he was the Abbey Dean's last disciple at the South Sea. Long Qing thought that he knew what was happening in Chang'an. He had come all the way here at all costs just to cooperate with the Abbey Dean. The Abbey Dean should have defeated the Academy and broken the God-stunning array. Without any official army to protect Chang'an, Chang'an was a sinner waiting for death in front of his 2,000 cavalrymen. Thinking of this, Long Qing could not help but feel happy. His cavalry would be the first army to attack Chang'an in history, and it would also be the last army to destroy Chang'an. He was the prince of the Yen Kingdom and the divine son of West Hill. It was his lifelong wish to destroy Chang'an and the Tang Empire. In order to achieve this wish, he had put in too much effort. Even his soul had been tested by ice and fire countless times. He had long been covered with cuts and bruises. For him, there was one more thing he had to accomplish while destroying Chang'an: to kill Ning Kei, an opponent who had left too many cruel memories in his life. In the Green Mountains behind the Jishou Abbey, he had used the gray eyes to devour the Halfman Taoist's lifetime cultivation. In the wilderness, he had also devoured the spiritual power of many priests of the palace. Now he had forcibly raised his state to the peak of the knowing destiny state. Although he knew that Ning Kei had also entered the knowing destiny state, he firmly believed that he would definitely win this time. From the banquet in Chang'an to the stone path in the back of the mountain of the Academy, to the arrow on the snow cliff in the wilderness, and to the autumn rain outside the Red Lotus Temple, he had lost to Ning Kei too many times. What made him most angry was that Ning Kei was clearly inferior to him in all aspects, but he still lost again and again. If fate really existed in the world, and if Haotian really looked down on the human world calmly and lovingly, then after so many inexplicable defeats, it should be his turn to win. The more he paid, the sweeter the fruit he harvested. Looking at the looming city in the north, Long Qing thought of the scene when he entered the city and the scene of Ning Kei falling painfully under his sword. He suddenly felt that all the pain he had suffered in the past few years had turned into an intoxicating fragrance. The houses on the side of the road collapsed in the raging fire, and the flames danced on the silver mask. His eyes, which were exposed outside the mask, were calm as usual, but the hand holding the reins trembled slightly. At this moment, the raging fire in the village suddenly extinguished. Long Qing looked at the village that had suddenly become extremely quiet. He looked at the scorched earth and ruins that were emitting black smoke, and looked at the quiet field. He raised his eyebrows slightly, and an extremely strange feeling arose in his heart. Even the most violent rain could not extinguish such a huge fire in such a short time. Even the most violent wind could not blow out all the flames in the village. Moreover, the dark clouds in the sky dispersed, revealing the clear blue sky. There was no trace of rain. The field on both sides of the official road was unusually quiet, and there was not even a trace of wind. What on earth happened? The surrounding cavalrymen also noticed this strange scene, and they looked around in confusion. Long Qing did not look in any other direction, but just stared at the other end of the official road. This straight and spacious official road led directly to Chang'an City, and it was the Vermilion Bird School. He could vaguely see a black sandstorm whistling over from afar. Long Qing did not know what the black wind was, but his heart subconsciously beat faster. His Taoist heart shook slightly, and endless fear arose in him. He just wanted to run away. Disperse. Avoid the wind. Long Qing's face was slightly pale, and he sternly shouted to the 2,000 cavalrymen scattered around. Then he lifted the reins and wanted to gallop down the official road to the scorched ruins of the village. These 2,000 cavalrymen were a mix of the papal cavalrymen of the Divine Hall and the Lieutenant Palace's direct cavalry. They were Long Qing's most loyal and elite subordinates. They were well trained and disciplined. Although the cavalrymen did not know what had happened, and they did not see the black wind in the distance, they did not hesitate to lift the reins and kick the horses when they heard Long Qing's stern command. They desperately scattered to the fields on both sides of the official road. As a powerhouse at the peak of knowing destiny state, Long Qing's sense of danger was very accurate and timely. The 2,000 cavalrymen also perfectly demonstrated their mobility and made the fastest response. However, the black wind from Chang'an City had already gone beyond the scope of the human world, and it could not even be described with speed. In an instant, it rushed more than 10 miles and came to the front of Long Qing and the cavalrymen. Wind was the flow of air. Air itself had no color, so the wind in the human world had always been colorless. The reason why the raging wind was black was that it was mixed with many things. Mud, dirty snow, teapot leftovers, iron pots and bricks were all in this violent wind. The clear light from the sky could not fall on the ground, so it looked so dim. What was truly terrifying was that apart from the hard objects in the black wind, there were also countless saber intents hidden in it. These saber intents were so sharp that even the whistling sound of the wind seemed to be cut into countless pieces by them. Some cavalrymen, who did not have time to rush into the field and were still on the official road, were the first to encounter the black wind. They screamed in horror, and then suddenly stopped shouting. Their bodies were cut into countless pieces, and their mounts were also cut into countless pieces at the same time, and then were rolled up by the wind. Those cavalrymen who scattered to the field did not avoid the edge of the black wind. Even if they dismounted and hid behind the broken wall was cut, and then they were cut. They hid behind the mound, and then the mound was overturned by the wind, and then they were also rolled up by the wind, and no one knew where they went. The black wind came, as if it was the deepest and darkest night. In the thick darkness, only the sound of countless knives cutting through the air could be heard, but no one wielding the knives could be seen. The cavalrymen screamed in despair and then died one after another. Long Qing looked at the houses in front of him that were cut into countless pieces by the wind, and his face turned slightly pale. At this moment, the black wind was already in front of him, and he finally saw some details in the wind. He saw the utensils of the ordinary people in Chang'an City, and then he saw the knife marks. He knew who wielded these knives. With a clear roar, he took out the dark and quiet peach blossom from his chest, and faced the black wind. This was his natal peach blossom, and he did not hesitate to use his lifelong cultivation. However, even though the Abbey Dean had comprehended the state of pureness between life and death, and turned white bones and flesh into white stems and red lotuses, he was still cut by the black wind, and no one knew whether he was dead or alive, let alone him. The black peach blossom withered at a speed visible to the naked eye, and then its petals fell off. Countless tiny wounds appeared on Long Qing's body. The silver mask on his face cracked like a dry field, and then peeled off. After a long time, the black wind finally stopped, and no one knew where the black wind went. Did it disappear, or broke the void, and entered another space? The fields in the south of the city returned to peace, but what fell first was not the clear light, but a terrible rain of blood. To be more precise, it was a storm of flesh and blood. The cavalrymen and warhorses that were cut into pieces by the knife intent flew up with the black wind, and then fell on the ground one after another until the black wind disappeared. Tens of thousands of pieces of flesh and blood fell on the state highway in the fields, making muffled sounds, and splashing blood and terrifying juices. The 2,000 cavalrymen that attacked Chang'an City all died in the black wind. Most of them were turned into pieces of flesh and blood, and some were directly swept up into the sky, and then fell to their deaths. The branches on the southeast side of the state highway were full of pieces of flesh and corpses. A dozen black crows flew over and circled the trees, cawing cheerfully, ready to welcome the grand banquet. These black crows could not have eaten all the pieces of flesh and blood, so there must be a lot left. The cavalrymen had burned the village, and the Taoist willow had also turned into charred branches. It must have been nourished by their flesh and blood, and in a few years, the willow trees here must have grown very beautiful. Long Qing was still alive. He looked at Chang'an City in the distance. The silver mask was broken, and the old wounds were not gone. There were many new wounds on his face, and his once perfect face was now very horrible, like the ghost corpse in the underworld. He suddenly laughed, and then burst into tears. For the city, to kill the person in the city, he had paid a very painful price, and was even willing to sacrifice his soul. However, when he was about to succeed, he found that it was still a wishful thinking. The city looked so close, but it turned out to be so far away. He had not even seen Ning Ke, but he was defeated, and his flesh and blood were all over the ground. What made him feel the most painful was that Ning Ke's knife did not cut him, and he believed that Ning Ke did not even know that he had been to Chang'an City and was once so close to it. But he was still defeated. He looked at Chang'an City in the distance, and let out a desperate cry. Ning Ke! Ever since they entered the second floor of the academy, there were busybodies in the world who described Ning Ke and Prince Long Qing as lifelong enemies. But Ning Ke really did not know that Long Qing was in the south of Chang'an City. He also did not know that Long Qing had been driven crazy by the black wind, and that the 2,000 elite cavalrymen who were supposed to bring disaster to Chang'an City had been cut into a rain of flesh and blood by the knife style in the wind. He had cut the Abbey Dean. The Abbey Dean was also the one that tens of millions of Tangs in Chang'an City wanted to cut. He had cut, and the black wind had brought darkness to the human world, and the Abbey Dean had been sent flying. It was quiet on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. Whether injured or not, everyone was looking at Ning Ke's back. It was Old Chow who finally broke the silence. Old Chow asked in a trembling voice, "Is he dead?" The people on the street were all brave, but no one wanted to face such a horrible person like the Abbey Dean again. Ning Ke shook his head. Everyone was silent. Ning Ke said, "But even if he is not dead, he will be disabled." Hearing his words, no one could react for a while. Zhang Nianzhu and Li Guangdi leaned against the wet wall, and looked at each other in confusion. Old Chow was startled, and scolded with a smile, "You are still teasing me at this time." He walked toward the eastern city with the help of his walking stick, and shouted, "Everything is over, what are you waiting for? Go home, and find your mother. Who is coming? Go to the Imperial Physician Bureau and call for help." Old Mrs. Chu laughed heartily, and handed the old knife to her youngest daughter-in-law behind her. It was not until then that people finally confirmed the outcome of the battle. Zhang Nianzu and Li Guangdi looked at each other and smiled. The tea maker laughed. Everyone burst into laughter. They all laughed out loud. The cheerful laughter gradually spread. Laughter rang out in every street and alley in Chang'an City. Yu Lian carried eldest brother and walked to the side of the street. Eldest brother had been chasing the Abbey Dean for 7 days, and his psyche power had long been exhausted. Today in Chang'an City, they had been fighting from morning till now, from the street to the sky, and he had been seriously injured, and no one knew how many bones in his body had been broken. Eldest brother, I didn't feel that you were so tall when we were at the back of the mountain. Yu Lian looked at eldest brother's toes that were almost touching the snow, and said with a slight frown. She frowned because she was confused, and also because of the pain. She jumped up to the sky, and then fell from the sky, and still had to carry eldest brother. Although she was the grandmaster of the devil's doctrine, she was also seriously injured, and could not bear the pain. Blood came out from her slender ankle, and the bones in her flesh were broken into pieces. Every step she took, bones pierced into her flesh, bringing endless pain. Yu Lian stopped in the middle of the street, and tiny beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. Eldest brother landed on the ground, carried her in his arms, and walked to the side of the street, and kept coughing blood. Finally, they walked to the side of the street with difficulty, and eldest brother put her down. He looked at her and explained in a slow and serious tone, "Younger sister, it's not that I have become taller, but that you have become shorter." Yu Lian responded with a hum. The two sat side by side on the broken doorsill. Eldest brother looked across the street and waved his hand. Mo Shanshan did not see it, because she was looking at the street. On the street, Ning Ke looked up at the sky and said, "Teacher, do you see it?" After a moment, he said again, "Sang Sang, do you see it?" Ning Ke slowly sat down. Countless sounds of knives were heard in Chang'an City. That was the sound of swords returning to their sheaths. Chapter 8:10. The winter was getting colder and colder, and the wind was like a knife. As the tension eased, the refugees who had been transferred to Chang'an had all returned to their homes. The people living in the south of the city were cleaning up the villages that had been burned by the enemy in the bitter cold. More than 100 Tang soldiers were walking along the official road. Judging from their armors and weapons, they should be the ordinary prefectural army of a certain state. The people who were busy rebuilding their homes saw the tired soldiers and put down the tools in their hands to cheer them up. Someone shouted, "We're almost at Chang'an." The Tang army nodded and continued to move forward. The applause by the roadside soon subsided. The imperial court could not increase the relief efforts. They had to rely on their own hands to survive the cold winter. The villagers had to hurry up and at least build houses that could withstand the wind. There were a few carriages behind the Tang army. The villagers who were busy working thought that the people in the carriages might be officials from some southern state, so they had no time to care about them. They did not know that, in a sense, it was the people in the carriages who had saved the Tang Empire. The sunlight shone through the gap of the window and fell on Jun Mo's face. He had not recovered from his serious injury and his thin cheeks were extremely pale. Under the winter sunshine, his face looked like clean snow. He looked at the scorched village outside the window and remained silent. No one knew what he was thinking. Mu Yu looked at his profile and her eyebrows were full of worry. The disciples of the back of the mountain of the academy were all seriously injured in the Battle of the Verdant Canyon. She was in the best condition. She had used up too much psyche power to maintain the tactical array. After resting for a few days, she had mostly recovered. Fourth brother and the others were in a much worse condition. They could not get up after receiving treatment and had been resting in the carriages behind. No one knew when they would really recover. But she was most worried about Jun Mo, because he was the most seriously injured. Jun Mo had woken up after leaving the verdant canyon. He seemed to be fine, but she was very worried. Because he had been silent for too long during the journey. He had been sitting quietly by the window, looking at the snow-covered fields in the south of the Tang Empire and the villages that had been burned by the enemy. Mu Yu looked at his determined profile and his scattered hair. Then she looked at his empty sleeve and sighed silently in her heart. Those carriages did not enter Chang'an City, but directly went to the academy. The Tang army in charge of escorting them left and they reached the meadow. The meadow was covered with a thin layer of snow. There were countless peach blossoms in the snow, but it was not the season for them to blossom yet. The academy was very quiet today, even a little deserted. No members of the royal family or ministers bowed humbly, no people lined the streets to welcome them, no grand ceremony, no loud gongs and drums, and not many people came to welcome them. No one cared about this, because they did not inform the people in Chang'an. They would go out to battle and then come back. Returning to the academy was the same as going home. There were only 2 people waiting for them on the meadow, the cute little attendant, Su Jialuan, and Ning Ke, who was holding a walking stick and covered in bandages. Looking at Jun Mo, the little attendant shed 2 lines of tears without saying a word. Jun Mo had left him in the academy and he had been living in fear for so many days. Today, he had finally seen his young master come back alive. How could he control his emotions? When he saw that Jun Mo's right arm was broken, he immediately burst into tears. Jun Mo frowned slightly and said, "Don't cry." The little attendant was obedient and desperately wiped his tears. However, there were too many tears, and he could not wipe them clean. When he saw Jun Mo's hair, he could not help but cry out. "Young master, how did your hair turn white?" Ning Ke looked at second brother's empty sleeves and gray hair, and did not know what to say. Jun Mo said expressionlessly, "There are burning villages everywhere, and there is too much dust on the road." It was a very clumsy and even cute explanation, but no one laughed. It was quiet in the carriage. "Why is the academy so quiet?" second brother asked. Ning Ke said, "Third sister dismissed instructors and students in the front yard of the academy in advance. Some instructors and students have left, but most of them are working for the imperial court in Chang'an City, and some have gone to the front line." Jun Mo asked, "How are senior brother and Yu Lian now?" Ning Ke said, "They are fine, but it is a little inconvenient for them to move." The carriage drove through the dilapidated stone gate of the academy and went deeper. The teaching building and the front hall of the second floor of the academy were all ruined, especially the lane leading to the old library and the back of the mountain. It was impossible to find anyone to repair it. Jun Mo looked at the scene in silence. The back of the mountain of the academy was still warm as spring. The little attendant and Tang Xiaotang carried the teachers to the soft beds in the thatched hut that could not be destroyed by the autumn wind. Some were still unconscious, and some were barely supporting themselves. They could not hear Beigong's flute, Shimon's zither, Song Qian and eighth brother's quarrel over a chess piece for the time being. They would probably never see their teacher again. Eldest brother and Yu Lian were sitting in the wheelchair. Jun Mo let go of Mu Yu's hand, walked to the wheelchair of eldest brother, and bowed to him. Then he looked at Yu Lian and said, "Xiong Chumo deserves to die. Why didn't you kill him?" Yu Lian said calmly, "Some people are more useful alive than dead." Second brother thought for a while and did not continue to ask. Eldest brother looked at his empty sleeves and gray hair and said, "Teacher once said that we should learn to accept some things since we can't change them. I don't care, but I feel regret." Jun Mo looked at the gray sky outside the hut and said, "I always wanted to be like youngest uncle, drawing his sword and fighting against the heavens. When Master ascended to the sky by the Sisui River, I thought that one day, I would be able to follow Master's footsteps. But now it seems that there is no chance. Not everyone could understand what he was saying. Eldest brother sighed and brought up another matter. Pippi has left. In the back of the mountain, Junemo and Chun Pippi were the closest. Hearing the news, he kept silent for a while and then asked, "Can the Abbey Dean recover?" It was the most important question for the academy. Junemo looked at Ning Ke when he asked the question. Everyone in the hut who was awake was looking at Ning Quebec. That day on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, Ning Ke had given an answer to the people in Chang'an. But today he still thought for a long time and then said with certainty, "No." Hearing this answer, second senior brother's cold expression finally relaxed a little. Even the wind that blew into the thatched cottage seemed to have become a little warmer. The state that the Abbey Dean had shown was the coldest cloud in the heart of the people in the back of the mountain. Although he was defeated in Chang'an, he was not defeated by Ning Ke, but by the god-stunning array. In other words, he was still defeated by the headmaster of the academy. If it were not in Chang'an but in another place in the human world, no matter eldest brother, Junemo or even Yulian, they would not be able to defeat the Abbey Dean. As for Ning Ke, it was even more impossible. The sound of the waterfall reverberated in the courtyard. It was deafening. Ning Ke had never understood how second brother could fall asleep in such an environment. He also could not understand how senior brothers and sisters could hear each other's voices when they were discussing in the courtyard. He once asked second brother this question, and second brother's answer was, "You will get used to it after a long time. As long as your heart is calm, no sound can disturb your ears." Dozens of days later, Junemo returned to his courtyard after 7 days and 7 nights of unimaginable fighting in front of the verdant canyon and 2 dazzling battles between powerhouses. For the first time, he felt that the sound of the waterfall was a little noisy. He knew that it was because his heart was not calm enough. It was already dark. He stood by the window and looked at the night sky above the mountain. He was silent for a long time, and then he looked at his empty sleeve and frowned slightly. He had lost his right arm in the battle with Lu Bai. The disability of the body was not a problem. Junemo could still sweep the world with the iron sword in his left hand. The problem was the disability of the mind. The body and the mind had always been 2 sides of the same coin. He was very clear that he would probably never reach the end of the cultivation path in this life. The end of the cultivation path was the Great Way. The other side of the river was the other side. It was not above the 5 states, but a higher place. It was a place that only youngest uncle and the headmaster of the academy could reach. It was above the sky. In terms of sword Taoism, he was only slightly inferior to Lu Bai. But he was younger and had more potential, so he had more hope of reaching that place. Now, these hopes had been lost. For cultivators, this was the heaviest blow. It was even more terrible than death. It made people crazy. Even someone as strong as Junemo gradually turned black. But if someone asked him if it was all worth it, he would still disdain to answer. Because he did not see the water of the Yellow River coming from the sky. Because the mountains saw how charming he was. The falling water could not rise again, and the collapsing mountain could not rise again. Regret had nothing to do with the proud second brother. How could it not be worth it to fight with Lu Bai to his heart's content? It was just, a little regretful. If we can't fight with heaven, it's actually very interesting to fight with people. Ning Ke walked into the small courtyard. He looked at the lonely back of second brother and said, "Although the Abbey Dean is disabled, eldest brother and third sister are also seriously injured. They can't be seen and can't recover in a short time. Both the Tang Empire and the Academy need you now." Junemo did not turn around and said, "Don't worry about me." Ning Ke said, "I can't not worry." Junemo turned around and looked at him with a smile. He said, "It's just a little regret. Don't think about it. Ning Ke suddenly felt that he did not know this man standing in front of him. It was as if some subtle changes had happened to him. It was not because second brother did not wear a crown or a bun, nor was it because he showed a rare smile. He was still the proudest person in the world, but he did not have the aura that made people stay away from him. This change made Ning Ke a little uncomfortable and he did not know what to say. Jun Emo said, "I'm just not used to it. When I put my hands behind my back, my left hand can no longer hold my right hand, and I can't salute anymore. The most important thing is that my posture is not good." 2 chapters with 7,000 words are completed. 2 chapters will be written tomorrow. Please vote for me on Monday and report to me. I will try to finish this volume in 4 days. I have been thinking about the outline of the next volume these 2 days, so I don't have enough brain power. I read the 4th volume, The Year of the Curtain, again and found that it is really good. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 8:11. While they were talking, Muyu walked into the room from the backyard with a basin of hot water. She was surprised to see Ning Ke, but she didn't say anything and began to help second brother dress up. "I can't comb my hair or wear a crown," Jun Emo said. Ning Ke said, "You don't need to do it yourself since seventh sister is here." Jun Emo said, "Men and women should be different. Some things are not convenient." Ning Ke smiled and said, "Everything will be convenient after we get married." It was quiet. The sound of the waterfall falling into the pond was very clear. Muyu lowered her head and was a little shy. Jun Emo coughed and asked seriously, "What else do you want?" Ning Ke was feeling the atmosphere in the room. When he heard this, he held back his laughter and said, "I do need your help." Jun Emo said, "Besides eldest brother and Yu Lian, you are the only one who can see my problem. It means your state is quite good. Although it is not stable, you don't need to worry too much. It's not about that." Ning Ke clapped his hands and shouted to the courtyard door outside the window, "Come in." 2 youths with crutches walked in from outside the small courtyard. Both of them looked very nervous, but if one looked closely, they would be able to see that there was actually a huge difference between them. One of the youths was well dressed. He was obviously very nervous, but he still looked around out of the corner of his eyes, pretending to be calm. There was a kind of stinginess in his eyes. The other youth in plain clothes was looking at his feet. His right hand, which was holding the crutch, kept trembling. If it wasn't for the youth in front of him leading him, he probably wouldn't even be able to walk. Ning Ke said to second brother, "In the battle with the Abbey Dean a few days ago, these 2 boys performed well. Judging from their recovery, their bodies are also good. I just don't know if they have potential. Do you want them to enter the academy?" Jun Emo asked. Ning Ke said, "If you think they are good enough, you can choose one as your disciple and give the other one to me. But these days, you may need to teach them." "I don't have time." Jun Emo said, "You don't have a disciple yet." Ning Ke said, "If eldest brother wants it, I'll give it to him." The 2 teenagers were Zhang San and Li Si. After the bloody battle on the snow street, they were taught a good lesson. If they had not been seriously injured, they would have been beaten by the elders. Because of their injuries, Li Si and his family did not return to their hometown but lived in the Zhang family's house in Sanyuanli. Today, the Chang and local government suddenly sent someone to take them from Chang and to the academy. The 2 youths had no idea what had happened. They walked into the academy in a daze and entered the clouds halfway up the mountain. Then, they arrived at the real academy. For the Tangs, the academy was the most honorable place, but it was not mysterious. However, the back mountain was a completely different world, because all the details indicated that it should be a fairyland. It was not until they entered the small courtyard accompanied by the sound of the waterfall and heard the conversation between Ning Ke and Jun Mo that the two teenagers realized what kind of lucky chance they had encountered. So they became more and more nervous. Even Zhang Nianzu did not dare to look around. He looked down at his toes and prayed silently in his heart. Ning Ke said, "I know there is a test to enter the back mountain, but I really like these two boys. Now I'm worried that they have no aptitude for cultivation, like I did in the past." Jun Mo said, "Since you can cultivate, so can they. As long as the academy is willing to teach people, there is no one that cannot be taught. If you want them to stay, then stay." Ning Ke did not stay any longer. He said a few words to the two teenagers and left. Seventh sister sent him out of the hospital. At the gate of the courtyard, she met someone who was talking. The two teenagers were in extreme shock and happiness and did not notice Ning Ke's departure. They looked at the one-armed man in front of them in awe and waited for his instructions. At this moment, a big white goose walked into the small courtyard, shaking its butt. It came to the front of the house with familiarity and clumsily stepped over the high threshold. It walked to Jun Mo's feet and sat down, closing its eyes to rest. It was injured when the hierarch broke into the mountain and had not yet recovered. It was a little listless. Otherwise, if it saw two strangers in its own yard, who knew what would happen? Even so, the two teenagers were still shocked by the big white goose that seemed to know how to behave. When you learn the rules of the academy in the future, the first thing you have to learn is to be calm in the face of danger. Jun Mo looked at the two teenagers and said expressionlessly, "Go to the yard and stand. You are not allowed to use crutches. You are not allowed to bend your knees and close your eyes. If you can see the first ray of sunlight tomorrow morning, you will pass." Colliding with the big white goose at the gate of the small courtyard, Ning Ke was almost pecked by it. If it were not for the fact that it was not in good spirits, he would definitely not let it go. He said angrily, "Senior sister, when you become the owner of this small courtyard in the future, you can't be like senior brother, who is so strict with Jia Luan and spoils the big white goose. You have to control that animal more. Can't you see that I am also a disabled person now? How dare it bite me?" Mu Yu was a little nervous. Hearing his words, she did not know what to say. She asked in a low voice, "Did you already know about this?" Ning Ke said with a smile, "We are not blind." Mu Yu twisted the embroidered handkerchief in her hand into a flower and explained in a low voice, "It was he who liked me first." Ning Ke said, "The headmaster is not here. Who dares to care about this?" Mu Yu said cautiously, "Even if the headmaster is still here, he won't disagree, right?" Ning Ke looked at the bright moon in the night sky and somehow felt a little annoyed. He said, "Who knows what nonsense that old guy will come up with?" "What do you mean by nonsense?" "That is, pulling the little calf. Why would the headmaster do such a thing?" "Because, he is close to the old yellow calf." "Younger brother, you are talking nonsense again. Anyway, the headmaster is not reliable." "Well, the headmaster has never been reliable." Mu Yu looked at the bright moon in the mountains and smiled. Then she turned to Ning Ke and bowed, "Younger brother, thank you." Ning Ke brought the two teenagers to the academy to be apprenticed to the headmaster. No matter what the reason was, he let second brother handle this matter because he wanted to distract senior brother. That was what she thanked him for. Ning Ke smiled and did not say anything more. The back of the mountain was very big. Everyone had their own small courtyard, and it was either a mountain or a lake. Even Tang Xiaotang was no exception. Song Qian and the eighth brother played chess under the pine tree all day long. The scholars lived in the library cave all year round. Basically, no one lived in their small courtyard, and it was empty. In the past, because of Sang Sang, Ning Ke was the only non-resident student in the back mountain of the academy. Basically, he lived in the old brush pen shop or Yanming Lake. Occasionally, he would stay overnight in the mountain, but he always kept his house. The night was dark and foggy. He walked slowly along the mountain path with the help of his walking stick to his small courtyard. Sang Sang was not in Chang'an. The house at Yanming Lake had been destroyed by him, and the wall of the old brush pen shop had also been cut into two. He had no reason to return to Chang'an, so he would probably make this place his home in the future. His small courtyard was not far from the Mirror Lake. It was behind the dense forest where senior brother Beigong and senior brother Shiman usually played the zither. It was very secluded and quiet. The moonlight fell on the eaves and made it even colder. Someone was waiting for him. Tang Xiaotang leaned against the mud wall and lowered her head. She looked at her old leather boots and kicked the wall from time to time. Ning Ke looked at her beautiful face and the faint sadness between her eyebrows. He said, "Ask whatever you want." Tang Xiaotang looked up at him and asked, "Is Sang Sang really dead?" She was Sang Sang's good friend, and Sang Sang had very few good friends. Thinking of this fact, Ning Ke suddenly felt some pain in his body. After coming back, not many people would mention Sang Sang in front of me. Some people probably felt it was not convenient to mention her, such as senior brother and senior sister. Most people have completely forgotten her. Without waiting for Tang Xiaotang to speak, he continued, "Yes, Sang Sang is dead." His tone was very calm, as if he was describing a very ordinary thing. But the more it was so, the sadder it was. Tang Xiaotang said, "She is really Haotian's daughter." Ning Ke was silent for a moment and said, "Or, she is Haotian." He thought of the traces left by Haotian in the God-stunning array, the traces of Sang Sang in Chang'an, and the old residence and past that he had cut off. He suddenly laughed and said, "I raised Haotian and even slept with her. Don't you think I am a very legendary person?" Tang Xiaotang suddenly felt that he was very pitiful, but she did not know how to comfort him. Because she was also a very pitiful person now. Ning Ke looked at her and said, "I know what you want to ask." Pippi left Chang'an with the Abbey Dean on his back. He should be going back to the Jishou Abbey. I want to tell you that I owe him a lot, and I also owe him my life. So if there is anything you need me to do in the future, I will risk my life to do it. Tang Xiaotang understood what he meant and said, "Youngest uncle, thank you very much." The two hugged in the cold moonlight, giving each other warmth and courage, and then said goodbye. Ning Ke used to think that he owed nothing, but the world owed him. It was not until he went to the city of Wei, came to Chang'an, and entered the academy that he found that he owed more and more. He owed Chen Pippi his life, and he owed Mo Shanshan a favor. Mo Shanshan did not accept the eldest brother's invitation to live in the academy. She still stayed in the hotel in Chang'an. She came all the way from the Great River Kingdom and left the sect for the academy, the red walls, and the white snow. Ning Ke did not know how to face it. He did not know what would happen to lovers in the end. Not all men and women would be like second brother and seventh sister. Just like he once had a wife, but now he tossed and turned on the bed alone. He thought that all these things would probably pass after a good sleep, but he could not fall asleep no matter how hard he tried. He opened his eyes and looked at the white moonlight outside the window. That year when he left the city of Wei, the starlight was also as cold and white as frost. The wound left by the Abbey Dean on his body suddenly became very painful, and so did his heart. Try to finish the next chapter before midnight. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 8:12. It was very lively at the city gate. Thousands of Tang soldiers walked into the city gate one after another. They had just returned from a tough battle. Their clothes were ragged, they looked tired, and they were all heavily or lightly injured. Countless citizens of Chang'an lined the streets to welcome the returning soldiers from the front line. There was still no noisy gongs and drums, but there were warm smiles and waving hands. This was the first rotation of the Tang army since the war began. Most of the troops that had withdrawn from the front were settled in various counties, and only a small part of them returned to Chang'an. The imperial court of the Tang Empire had shown almost perfect administrative ability and stunning efficiency during the war. Since the recruitment order was issued, hundreds of thousands of former veterans had either spontaneously or organized replenishment to the front lines. All kinds of materials were continuously transported to the front lines, which finally gave the Tang Empire a chance to take a breather. The tragic war was still going on. The ceremony to welcome the returning soldiers was solemn but simple, and the ceremony in Chang'an was no exception. But the Empress's presence still attracted many people. An ordinary carriage was parked beside the state highway outside the city. The bustling city gate became quiet as people left, but the carriage seemed to have no intention of leaving. It stayed in the same place. Chang'an people were very vigilant during the war. It didn't take long for someone to notice the abnormality of the carriage and report it to the City Patrol Division. The soldiers of the City Patrol Division went to ask. When they saw clearly who was sitting in the carriage, they quickly apologized and left, which attracted many curious gazes. A hand lifted the cyan curtain and Ning Kai looked through the window at the distance of the state highway frozen by the winter. When he finally saw dust flying, he got off the carriage with the help of his walking stick. Dozens of Tang soldiers returned to Chang'an. Judging from their weapons and mounts, they should be the cavalrymen of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion. The Valiant Cavalry Battalion was directly under the command of the Imperial Palace and was a real noble army. In terms of status, it was even higher than the Yulin Royal Guards. But now the cavalrymen of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion looked even worse than the ordinary Tang soldiers who had entered the city. Ning Kai looked at the man on the horse and said, "I'm really not used to seeing you in leather armor." The man was covered in dust, but he still had a heroic spirit. Hearing Ning Kai's words, he smiled and said, "Since I'm in the army and not collecting rent in Chang'an, I can't wear those old clothes." He was Cao Xiaoshu, who had led the Valiant Cavalry Battalion to the eastern border. Cao Xiaoshu jumped off the horse. Before he could speak, he started coughing. Ning Kai said, "Since you are injured, don't ride a horse." After saying this, he turned around and boarded the carriage. Cao Xiaoshu smiled and turned back to say a few words to Lu Wu. He then sat in the carriage and said, "Since you are here to welcome me, how can you enter the carriage first?" Ning Kai pointed at the bandages on his body and said, "The Abbey Dean poked 7 holes in me and I've lost all my blood. I don't dare to stand in the cold wind for too long." Cao Xiaoshu looked at his face and found that he could no longer find the Akiji from back then. Thinking of the news that had been circulating in Chang'an, he said, "I thought you were dead." Ning Kai said, "I also thought you were dead." The two looked at each other and smiled. Ning Kai asked, "Why do you think I will die?" Cao Xiaoshu said, "I heard that before you killed Xiahou, you said in front of all the civil and military officials that your story is not a story in the books. Since that is the case, you should die no matter what when you meet the Abbey Dean." Ning Kai said, "You left your wife and children to be a hero with hundreds of cavalrymen. I thought this kind of hero would die in the end to perfectly express his tragic emotions. So I thought you were dead." Cao Xiaoshu said after a moment of silence, "Many people died." Ning Kai lifted the window and looked back, looking at the heavy horse carriages behind. In the carriages were the corpses of the soldiers of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion. They were covered with horse skins. After being blown by the cold winter wind for so many days, the edges of the horse skins had turned blue. You left Chang'an with hundreds of cavalrymen, but only a few dozen were left when you came back. Too many people died. Ning Kai said, "The battle at the eastern border was terrible." Cao Xiaoshu said, the Northern Battlefront Army fought against the Golden Tribe Royal Court on their own. Compared to them, people like us at the eastern border have no right to complain. It's just that the border is empty and the Eastern Wilderness Cavalry is rampaging. The volunteers from all counties have suffered a lot. Ning Ke said, I thought you would come back earlier. Chao Xiaoshu said, a few days ago, I chased after Longqing all the way to Chentang County. Then I found that the problem was solved by you. So I went back to the eastern border first. If the Academy had not defended Chang'an and blocked the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army at the Verdant Canyon for 7 days, the Gushan Commandery and the Northeast Border Military could not have been reorganized. Then I would still be there. Ning Ke said, changes in the situation will take time. Chao Xiaoshu looked at the bandages on his body and said, when will you recover? The question sounded simple, maybe just out of concern. But Ning Ke knew that Chao Xiaoshu would not be so simple when he mentioned his injury. I don't know. He knew what Chao Xiaoshu wanted to ask, so he continued, I don't know when my senior brothers and sisters will recover. You don't have to think about it for now. Chao Xiaoshu frowned slightly and asked, why so slow? Ning Ke said, it's not easy to get injured, and it's not easy to recover after being injured. He thought of his senior brothers who were still seriously injured in the back mountain and his third sister who was still sitting in a wheelchair. His expression gradually became dignified. If a Taoism powerhouse sneaked into the Tang Empire's henchmen, it would bring a lot of trouble. Entering from the eastern city gate, they had to pass through the eastern city. When the carriage passed by the old brush pen shop, Ning Ke lifted the curtains and looked at the shop, which was still intact. He thought of what had happened here over the years and could not help but sigh. In the spring of the 13th year of the Tianqi era, Yu and Sangsang came to Chang'an. Now it is the late winter of the 18th year. In fact, only 5 years have passed, but it feels like decades. Chao Xiaoshu looked at the old brush pen shop and the shops next to it. He thought of the spring rain in the 13th year of the Tianqi era, the killing that night, and his bowl of noodles with fried eggs without eggs. He smiled slightly. Ning Ke looked at him and suddenly said, actually, now that I think about it, we are actually not that familiar. Chao Xiaoshu said, yes, we haven't seen each other too many times. Ning Ke said, don't you think it's a little strange? 20 years ago, when the former emperor was still the crown prince, I met him for the first time in the House of Red Sleeves. We had a fight and then a drink. From then on, I became second brother Chao. A cup of wine is a life, and a bowl of noodles is also a life. Chao Xiaoshu said, Chang'an is a very interesting city. Things like this have happened many times, but people living here still enjoy it. So it's not strange at all. Ning Ke thought about it and said, indeed. Chao Xiaoshu did not return to his home in the Spring Breeze Pavilion. Instead, he went directly to the palace. After entering the palace, there was a eunuch to greet them. Chao Xiaoshu followed him into the hall, but Ning Ke did not follow him. He waved his hand to let the eunuch leave and went to the imperial study. His life was full of ups and downs, and there had been many critical turns. Many places were of great significance to him, but the imperial study of the Tang Imperial Palace was undoubtedly a very special place. It was here that he had written the painting, The Flower Blooms on the Other Shore, and that was how he got to know the former emperor. It was here that he talked with Li Yu for a long night, and then he chopped off Li Huiyuan's head in front of the hall the next day. He put the stick in front of the bookshelf and slowly moved to the desk. He ground the ink, laid the paper, and began to write. He kept writing, and wrote many pieces of paper. The former emperor liked his handwriting, but he refused to write. Even if he occasionally gave him a few pieces of paper, it was like cutting his own flesh. Now that he thought about it, he should have written a few more to make His Majesty happy. Now he was willing to write, but His Majesty could not see it. It was very quiet in the imperial study. Only the sound of the brush gliding on the paper could be heard. Suddenly, a few extremely majestic reprimands came from somewhere. Ning Ke was slightly absent-minded. The imperial study was very close to the front hall, so the sound must have come from there. At that moment, he even thought that he had heard His Majesty scolding an idiot. As he said in the carriage, he was not familiar with Cao Xiaoshu, but they could live and die together. In fact, he was not familiar with His Majesty, but His Majesty dared to hand Chang'an and the future of the Li royal family to him, and he dared to use his own life to complete this task. Because this was Chang'an, and this kind of thing was very common. The trust between him and His Majesty did not start from the flower blooms, but when he heard His Majesty scolding an idiot in the imperial study. He liked to scold people as idiots, so he felt very happy. Ning Ke came to his senses. His Majesty was already dead, and no one in the palace was scolding an idiot. He shook his head and continued to write. Suddenly, his hand that was holding the pen became a little stiff. Because he heard the voice coming from the front hall again. This time, he heard it clearly. That majestic voice was indeed scolding an idiot. Her Majesty was scolding someone. Ning Ke laughed and felt very happy. In the depths of the palace, there was a huge map marked with complicated lines and annotations. Under the illumination of dozens of arm-thick candles, all the details could be seen clearly. A middle-aged staff officer of the military ministry was holding a thin and long wooden stick and pointing at the map. He was explaining to everyone in the hall, but it was obvious that not many people could listen. The Empress was a little tired. She sat behind the desk and took a cup of tea, slowly drinking. The generals and ministers looked at the Empress's gentle appearance. How could they imagine the scene when the Ministry of Revenue had a problem delivering provisions to the Western Expedition Army, and the Empress had scolded them as idiots? Cao Xiaoshu stood quietly in the corner, looking at the Empress without saying a word. But just like someone in the imperial study, he thought of His Majesty who had scolded him as an idiot in the hall. Some people were still alive, and they had returned to their hometowns. Some people had died, and they had also returned to their hometowns. Perhaps they had never left. This was good. 2 chapters tomorrow, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 8:13. The slender wooden stick, painted with red paint, kept moving on the silk military map, as if it was a torch that was about to ignite the map. The fire continued to spread across the Tang's territory. After the great victory on the plateau, the Tang Western Army did not rest or return to help. Instead, they chose to cross the Pamir Mountains and go straight to Chaoyang City. The army led by General Xu Cheng was alone in a foreign country. If they could finally conquer Chaoyang City and capture the Yueluan royal family, it would be of great strategic significance to the current tense situation. Long Qing and the 2,000 cavalrymen were annihilated under the city of Chang'an. The cavalrymen of the wilderness were shocked and fearful. They lacked effective military command, so they could no longer pose much of a threat to the remnants of the northeast border military and the Tang army, which mainly consisted of the volunteer army. The situation at the eastern border was gradually stabilized and had entered the stage of cleanup. The real threats were still in the north and the south. The Northern Battlefront Army had a lot of new soldiers and could even free the Gushan Commandery to help the eastern border. However, the Golden Palace had been preparing for decades to invade the east border. The war was still extremely fierce, and the Tang army was always in a passive state of defense. It was impossible to destroy the main force of the Golden Palace's cavalrymen in a short period of time, and then launch a large-scale counterattack. The situation at the Verdant Canyon in the south was also very tense. The main force of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was made up of the South Jin Army, but its real strength was far more than that. Whether the Divine Hall Coalition army attacked the verdant canyon or took a detour to the eastern border, it would bring great pressure to Chang'an, and it was very likely that the war would be reversed again. However, it was very puzzling that the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army's attack was much weaker than expected. Looking at the movement of the supplies, it seemed that they did not intend to take a detour to the north. It was very quiet in the palace, and the ministers and generals were all very confused. What on earth is the Divine Hall thinking? Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary, said, "Is it possible that the Divine Hall still wants to preserve their strength and wait for us and the Golden Palace to suffer losses before they really attack? The Divine Hall wants to negotiate." The Empress pointed to a letter on the table and said. The letter was bright yellow, a color that only the West Hill Divine Palace and the Tang imperial family were qualified to use. The Empress's words made everyone in the hall speechless. No one could understand why the West Hill Divine Palace would want to negotiate with them at this moment. The hall became quiet again. No one spoke. Even if the whole world were to attack the Tang Empire, the Tangs were not afraid. But the ministers and generals in the hall were not hot-blooded youths. The most valuable quality they had was calmness. As long as they calmed down, they would be able to clearly understand the difference in power between the Tang Empire and the whole world. Whether it was population, resources, warhorses, or territory, the Great Tang was the strongest country in the world, but when compared to the rest of the world, it was undoubtedly at an absolute disadvantage. Especially with the destruction of the northeast border military in the capital of the Yan Kingdom, the blood of the Qinghe County Navy dyed the Great Lake red, and the strength of the Tang army suffered a heavy loss. Although the Academy and the Imperial Court had worked hard to temporarily alleviate the danger of the country's destruction, no one dared to say if the Tang Empire could continue to fight hard under the attack of the Golden Tribe Royal Court and the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army from the north and the south, and no one dared to say how long the Tang Empire could last. From a rational point of view, the West Hill Divine Palace's proposal for peace was undoubtedly what the Tang Empire wanted to see the most. However, under such circumstances, the Tang Empire would definitely have to pay a great price. It was even possible to guess that the coalition army would definitely ask the Tang Empire to cede territory and pay compensation. Since the founding of the Tang Empire 1,000 years ago, the Tang Empire had always won every battle. No one had ever surrendered, let alone made an alliance. Could it be that they could no longer uphold the pride of their ancestors? If they were really forced to negotiate, who would do it? Who would dare to sign the document at the risk of being accused by the Tangs of betraying the country for glory? That was the source of the silence in the hall. The Empress said, the ministers should discuss whether to negotiate or not and how to negotiate. In short, we should draw up a plan as soon as possible. We must be fast, because every day we delay will mean one more day of death. In the imperial study, the Empress looked at the calligraphy sections that were not completely dry. She seemed to have thought of something. After a moment of silence, she said, "You heard it all." Ning Ke threw the pen into the water urn and wiped his hands with a piece of paper. He said, "Since the Divine Hall wants to negotiate, then we will accompany them. We can negotiate however we want, but we can't lose." The Empress said, "Since we have the upper hand, if we are not willing to lose, the Divine Hall will definitely not agree. So since we want to negotiate, we must be prepared to lose." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "First of all, we have to understand why the Divine Hall suddenly wants to negotiate. You should know that the main force of the Divine Hall Coalition Army has not even fought a serious battle until today." The Empress asked, "In your opinion, what is the reason for the Divine Hall's initiative to negotiate?" There was a pot of freshly brewed rock tea on the desk and an exquisite tea set on the bookshelf. Ning Ke took out the tea set and poured 2 small cups of tea. He pushed one cup to the Empress and drank the other one. Then he took out everything from the tea set box and put them into the delicately curved and beautiful tea tray. The tea tray was like a sea and could hold countless tea sets. Ning Ke took the largest teapot from the tea tray and said, "Now we can confirm that the Abbey Dean has been crippled. So has the hierarch." He took a thin teaspoon from the tea tray and grabbed a few teacups with one hand. He continued, "The great divine priest of revelation, Master Chi Mei and Yi Su have also been crippled." Finally, he tapped the wooden tube that contained the tea and said, "Lu Bai cut off second brother's right arm and second brother stabbed him in the chest. Lu Bai will not attack again in a short period of time." Looking back at the magnificent war in the past few months, the Tang army had fought bloody battles and ordinary people had risen up. But the real key was the battle between the powerhouses of the academy and Haotian Taoism. The eldest brother had held the Abbey Dean back for 7 days, seriously injured Master Chi Mei in front of the Pamir Mountains and the great divine priest of revelation in front of the verdant canyon. The second brother had fought against several peerless powerhouses in front of the verdant canyon. He first defeated Yi Su and then injured Lu Bai. He had prevented the West Hill Divine Palace army from entering the verdant canyon with his fellow disciples. The third sister had crippled the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace and then joined forces with the eldest brother in Chang and to fight the Abbey Dean from the ground to the sky. In addition to the god-stunning array left by the headmaster and the character written by Ning Ke, eldest brother, second brother and third sister had directly changed the direction of the war. The academy has indeed been crippled, but Haotian Taoism has paid a heavier price. I didn't expect that they would want to negotiate. I even feel that the news came a little late. Ning Ke looked at the Empress and said, "Now both sides need time to heal, so you don't have to worry about the Academy's attitude. You can negotiate as you like." The Empress said, "Yes, time is in our favor." Ning Ke looked at the dim moon outside the window and said, "Maybe not." The imperial study was silent. He and the Empress looked at the moon. They both knew that the key to the final outcome of the human world was on the moon in the night sky. The Empress looked back at him and asked, "Does the Academy have any other opinions?" The senior brothers and senior sisters in the back mountain don't understand the political and military affairs, so they don't have any opinions for me to pass on to you. But I do have something to remind you. What is it? If there is a way, please send a letter to the Pamir Mountains and ask General Xu Cheng to return. Hearing this, the Empress raised her eyebrows and said, "According to the time, the Western Army will attack Chaoyang City and destroy Yueluan City in half a month. How can we ask them to give up now? Chaoyang City must not be entered." Ning Ke thought of the peak under the wilderness and the yellow temples among the peaks. He said, "The Academy and Taoism have both suffered great losses. I don't want someone like the chief preaching monk to come to Chang'an." The Empress was from the Devil's Doctrine. Even though she had lived in the palace for a long time, she still knew about the legendary figures in the cultivation world. She understood Ning Ke's fear and agreed. She said, "The military ministry once had a plan to let the Western Army ignore Yueluan Kingdom and enter the wilderness from the Pamir Mountains. They would try to find Chanyu's location when the main force of the Golden Tribe invades the south." Ning Ke thought of the quagmire in the wilderness and said, "This plan is too risky. It's better to give up. Let the Western Army withdraw from the Pamir Mountains and move to the 7 stockade villages." The Empress said, "Let's do it. But if the imperial court agrees to negotiate with the Divine Hall, the Divine Hall will definitely ask the Academy to negotiate. Will you or Mr. First show up then? The Academy can't, at least not me." Ning Ke looked at the scattered teacups on the table and said, "If the Academy shows up, we won't regret it in the future. If I sign it, how can I kill people in the future?" Chao Xiaoshu had been waiting for Ning Ke in the duty room, waiting for him to leave the palace. It suddenly began to snow in the night sky. Not long after, the square and the surrounding streets were covered with a thin layer of snow, which made the ground slippery. Qiao Xiaoshu said, "The road is not easy to walk on. Let's have a drink first." Ning Ke nodded. There was a soup shop at the end of the alley. It was already full of people. The easing of the war was quickly reflected in the lives of the people. However, the customers were not as noisy as usual. Seeing that there were more customers, the shop owner moved tables and chairs outside the shop and asked if it was okay. Qiao Xiaoshu and Ning Ke did not care. They began to eat the hot mutton giblet soup in the snow. Before he raised his cup, Qiao Xiaoshu suddenly asked, "What are you going to do with Liu?" Ning Ke was putting coriander into Qiao Xiaoshu's bowl. Hearing this, he froze for a moment and then returned to normal. He said, "That's the Empress or the Imperial Court's business." Qiao Xiaoshu said, "I'm asking you." Ning Ke put down his chopsticks and looked at him. He said, "I remember that your relationship with her is very ordinary. After all, she is His Majesty's most beloved daughter." After saying this, Qiao Xiaoshu picked up the dipping sauce and put the fermented bean curd into Ning Ke's bowl. "I'm a little tired. I've written this chapter for a long time, but I won't collapse. I'll continue to write the next chapter, but it'll probably be written later. I have to go to work tomorrow to learn how to play ******. I'll go to bed early. It'll be the same tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 8:14. This place was not far from the Vermilion Bird Avenue. Some houses had been badly damaged by the battle that day, and some people were repairing them in the snowy night. Ning Ke did not seem to hear Qiao Xiaoshu's words. He looked there quietly for a long time and suddenly said, "Many people died on the street that day." Qiao Xiaoshu did not say anything else and started scooping out the mutton offal from the pot. Ning Ke filled his bowl with wine and said, "What do you think about the peace talks?" Qiao Xiaoshu said, "It's not convenient for me to speak on important matters in the imperial court." Ning Ke said, "The war is stabilizing, but it is not beneficial to the Tang Empire. Too much blood has been shed, and we need some time to recover. But since we have not lost, we cannot lose out in the negotiation." Qiao Xiaoshu said, "Let's eat first." The fragrance of the pot filled the air, and the wine was much fainter. After all, it was a time of war. The double steaming that Qiao Xiaoshu and Ning Ke liked could not be transported from the north. They ate in silence and did not drink too much. Qiao Xiaoshu only spoke when the mutton offal was almost finished and the sauce was almost finished. This war involves too many people. All the Tangs are contributing, but Liu seems to have been forgotten. But you should know that many people in the imperial court have not forgotten her. He looked at Ning Ke and said, "The prestige of the academy is too high, and the empress is powerful. Most importantly, because of the invasion, the imperial court and the public are united. Even her most loyal subordinates have chosen to lie low. But if the war ends or temporarily stops, the conflict will erupt again." Ning Ke said, "The officials in the imperial court are not really idiots. The empress has shown her means and ability to govern. They have no reason to continue supporting Liu." Qiao Xiaoshu said, "You seem to have forgotten one thing. Now everyone in the world knows that the empress is a remnant of the devil's doctrine. Although the Tangs have never submitted to the West Hill Divine Palace, their faith in Haotian cannot be washed away in a short time. They still have a natural hatred for the devil's doctrine." Ning Ke said, "What are you trying to say?" Qiao Xiaoshu said, "That depends on how the academy and the imperial court are going to deal with her. If everything is peaceful, she will be imprisoned in the princess mansion forever." Ning Ke looked into Qiao Xiaoshu's eyes and said, "If there are any signs of disturbance, I will kill her in the shortest time possible." Xiao Xiaoshu looked at him and said, "You used to be very close to her. Everyone in Chang'an knows that. I didn't expect you to be so cold to her." Ning Ke said, "As I said, many people have died on this street." Xiao Xiaoshu said, "I want to see her." Ning Ke raised his eyebrows slightly and asked, "Why do you want to see her?" Xiao Xiaoshu said, "Let's take a look or talk." "Although I don't think there's any need to talk, but," Ning Ke said, "I haven't seen Xiaoman for a long time. Let's go." The night street was quiet. The princess's residence, which used to be filled with guests, seemed especially cold and lonely. Even the commoners who occasionally walked by did not want to look at the nervous door. Ning Ke knew that there were many bodyguards hidden in the surrounding marketplace. He had always thought that Li Yu was an idiot, but this did not mean that the mother and son in the palace would lower their guard against her. He and Xiao Xiaoshu walked towards the princess's residence. Light snowflakes fell on the heavy gate. The inside of the courtyard was quiet and there were no lights. It looked like a tomb. After the Xianwei general's mansion was executed, it also looked like a tomb. When Ning Ke had just arrived in Chang'an, he had visited it several times. He knew that this was what a dilapidated mansion should look like, so he did not find it strange. He suddenly stopped and the walking stick under his armpit fell into the snow. Xiao Xiaoshu also stopped. In the seemingly normal night, they felt that something was wrong at the same time. They heard the faint sound of breathing coming from the ancient trees behind the wall. From the frequency of their breathing, they could tell that those people were a little nervous. Ning Ke looked up at the falling snow. The snowflakes fell slowly and looked beautiful, but he was not actually looking at the snow. His eyes brushed past the branches on the wall. Between the branches, he saw the sharp and cold arrowheads. "It's a crossbow." He looked at Xiao Xiaoshu and said with a smile, "It seems to be a Shenhou crossbow." Hearing the words, Shenhou crossbow, Xiao Xiaoshu also laughed. A few years ago, he and Ning Ke walked into the Spring Breeze Pavilion and killed countless people in the night rain. When they opened the door of the Chao mansion, they saw a Shenhou crossbow. There was no rain tonight, but there was snow. After so many years, they were once again targeted by a Shenhou crossbow. Their expressions were not as solemn as before. Instead, they laughed, because they were no longer the same as before. Xiao Xiaoshu was no longer the king of Jianghu. He had entered the knowing destiny state by the lake in the imperial palace. He could also escape from Lu Bai's sword. He already had a place in the ranks of the strongest cultivators in the human world. Ning Ke had changed the most. Although the old brush pen shop was still his, he no longer sold calligraphy for a living. The once abject youth from the border town was now a person from the academy who had entered the human world. Not to mention a few Shenhou crossbows, even if there were hundreds of heavy cavalry rushing towards them from the other end of the street, neither Xiao Xiaoshu nor Ning Ke would be moved. They were very strong, and even stronger when they stood together. They had seen it in the night rain in the Spring Breeze Pavilion years ago, or in the night snow in front of the princess's mansion a few years later. "I just want to know where they are from now," Ning Ke said. Xiao Xiaoshu said, "They should be the blood cloaks from the Gushan commandery. They are the most elite subordinates of the Hua family in the army. You may not know, but Hua Shangyue has already returned to Chang'an from the front line." Ning Ke said, "What is love in the world? It can turn people into idiots." Walking into the princess's mansion, it was still pitch black. Only the lights from other mansions outside the walls could be seen. With the light of the snow, they could barely see the old path between the fallen flowers. Ning Ke had been to the princess's mansion many times. He walked directly in with Xiao Xiaoshu, passing through the stone gate and the frozen surface of the lake. They saw the bean-like light on the lakeside balcony. There were many heavy gauze curtains on the balcony. The light was very dim, and the woman sitting there looked very lonely. It was winter, and no one could understand why she was sitting there in the cold wind. Ning Ke lifted the gauze curtain and looked at Li Yu. He said, "It seems that your mood has been quite good recently. It makes sense. As long as you have a thought in your heart, you can always get through the hard days." Li Yu was obviously thinner, but she was still beautiful. She ignored Ning Ke and bowed to Cao Xiaoshu, who was beside him. She said, "Thank you, second Uncle Cao, for remembering me." Cao Xiaoshu shook his head and did not speak. Ning Ke walked to her with the help of his walking stick. He rubbed the wick with his fingers to make the oil lamp brighter. He looked at Li Yu and said, "I used to call you an idiot behind your back. That's because I have too high expectations for you. In fact, you are not that stupid. Then you should be very clear that under the current situation, you can either stay in the mansion or die. The Tang Empire does not give you the right to choose a third path." Li Yu did not say a word and only looked at him quietly. Ning Ke said, "Why do you do such a stupid thing?" Hearing this, Li Yu laughed. Her laugh was a little sad. "Being imprisoned to death or being killed directly doesn't make much difference to me now. I would rather choose the latter. Moreover, I can't let Xiao Man live with me in this tomb for the rest of his life. These are all excuses." Ning Ke's tone was very calm. This calmness was even colder than the snow on the lake. "If you are worried about Xiao Man, you can directly send someone to tell me. For the sake of our old friendship, I will not let him waste his life here no matter what." "But you didn't, because you still want to get out. And you know, no matter what, I will not let you leave this princess mansion." The cold night wind blew up the gauze curtain and fell on Li Yu's body. She felt a little cold. Cao Xiaoshu stood at the side in silence. Li Yu looked at Ning Ke and suddenly said, "Do you hate me so much?" Ning Ke said, "It has nothing to do with love or hate. You know that I have always only considered interests." After saying this, he looked around the balcony and said, "Come out." It was quiet. After a while, sounds came from all around the balcony and below. More than 10 men in cloaks walked out. Hua Shangyue walked at the front, holding Xiao Man's hand. These people looked weathered and solemn. They were obviously soldiers. What surprised Ning Ke was that their cloaks were all white, unlike the blood cloaks that Cao Xiaoshu had mentioned. Until a gust of wind blew up the soldiers' cloaks, revealing the blood-red lining. Xiao Man, of course, knew Ning Quebec. Seeing him standing in front of her mother, she subconsciously wanted to call out to him. But she suddenly realized that the atmosphere on the balcony was a little strange. Ning Ke looked at her and smiled. Then he looked at Hua Shangyue and his smile gradually faded. He did not know how this person and the Tang elites in blood cloaks had entered the princess mansion, but he knew what they wanted to do. And that was definitely something that he could not allow to happen. "I can't believe that an idiot who is blinded by emotions can bring you out of Chang'an. I really don't know if I should be disappointed in you or proud of my judgment back then." Ning Ke looked at Hua Shangyue, but this sentence was directed at Li Yu. Li Yu said, "I don't believe that he can bring me out of Chang'an. But since he is here, I can't just chase him away. You have to know that he is the first guest that has come to the mansion these days." Ning Ke said to Hua Shangyue, "You are now the supervisor of 3 states, only 3 levels away from becoming a general. I heard that you have made a lot of achievements in the northern front, but they are all going to disappear tonight. Do you regret it?" Hua Shangyue looked at the crutch under his armpit and said, "Some things have to be tried before you know if you will regret it. I heard that you are seriously injured. Perhaps you are the one who will regret meeting me at this time." Ning Ke pointed at Cao Xiaoshu. Hua Shangyue said, "I heard that gang leader Cao is also seriously injured. Ordinary people can't tell that you cultivators are injured. But according to the military, you are as weak as rabbits. Ning Ke looked at him and the dozen blood cloaks and said, "Wishful thinking indeed makes one crazy." Hua Shanhua said, "There are 30 Shenhou crossbows pointing at you in the night. Of course I can think. 2 chapters tomorrow as well. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Ning Ke leaned on his crutch and looked at him, still silent. Then, he slowly straightened his body, his right hand loosened the crossbar under the crutch, as if preparing to draw a knife or write something. The previous 2 scenes had already shown the unimaginable gap in strength between the 2 sides. Seeing Ning Ke's actions, everyone knew what he was going to do next. At this moment, Chao Xiaoshu's hand landed on Ning Ke's shoulder. Ning Ke wanted to hear an explanation. Chao Xiaoshu looked at the Tang soldiers and asked, "Have you just come back from the front?" It was very quiet on the terrace. No one answered his question, because they did not know why he asked it. Ning Ke knew that Chao Xiaoshu's question was for him. He looked at the weathered faces of the Tang soldiers, and after a moment of silence, his right hand grasped the crutch again and leaned on it. He looked at Hua Shanhua and said, "No matter how you think about it, it's just wishful thinking." Hua Shanhua looked at his subordinates lying in a pool of blood beside him and was silent for a long time. Then, he withdrew his right hand that had been covering Buqi's eyes. He looked at Ning Ke and said, "Sometimes it's ridiculous to think about it. But even if you kill me, you can't stop me from thinking about it." When he said this, the expression on his face was very complicated. There was some regret, some self-mockery, and some unwillingness on his face. In order to save Li Yu and leave Chang'an, he had made very careful arrangements. However, who would have thought that on this snowy night, the princess mansion, which had been deserted for many days, would actually welcome 2 guests, Ning Ke and Chao Xiaoshu. The princess mansion, which had been deserted for a long time, became lively again tonight. The bodyguard office and the Chang and local government had sent a lot of people to the mansion. The street in front of the mansion was brightly lit by torches. Many people gathered on both ends of the street, looking at the movement over there and talking about it. Basically, there were no good words. The war was tense, and the Tang people were still fighting in the front line. But those high officials and nobles still caused so much trouble in Chang'an city. No one would show any sympathy to the losers. Hua Shanhua and more than 50 Tang soldiers from the Gushan commandery were disarmed and taken out of the princess mansion. What awaited them was the prison of the military ministry. As for what price they would eventually pay, no one knew yet. In hindsight, this rescue seemed to be too wishful thinking. It was not a problem to be judged as crazy. But in fact, Hua Shanhua was worthy of being the leader of the young and vigorous faction of the Tang army. He was not as incompetent as he had shown in this plan. His plan could be said to be perfect. As soon as he returned to Chang'an, he took action with lightning speed. He was prepared for every step. Li Yu stared at his eyes and her hands in her sleeves trembled slightly. She could imagine that Ning Ke could see through her thoughts and support, but she did not expect that Ning Ke would still be so cold after knowing all this. Now that the whole world was against the Tang Empire, other than the West Hill Divine Palace, the real threat to the Tang Empire was the cavalry of the Golden Palace invading from the north. If the Tang Empire wanted to completely eliminate the threat from the north, Xiaoman's background and her influence in the Golden Palace were very important. It was because of these reasons that she was sure that the Academy and the Imperial Court would keep her. In fact, you are not wrong. But the Academy and the Imperial Court may not do this, especially when I find that you want to use these as bargaining chips. Ning Ke looked at her and said, "Even if Butcher Li is dead, I can still eat pigs." The academy is still powerful and invincible even if the headmaster is gone. I have long planned for the wilderness that the Golden Palace owns. It would be better if I have your help. Even without you, I will still win in the end. Li Yu looked at him and raised her eyebrows. Even if many people die. Ning Ke said, as long as it is not the Tangs who die. Li Yu thought of a possibility and her expression changed slightly. She looked a little lonely. She said, it seems that the Tang Empire really does not need me and Xiaoman. Did you already make arrangements before the war? Ning Ke did not expect that she could guess his plans for the Golden Palace with just a few words. He said, it seems that you are indeed not an idiot in these aspects. Li Yu said self-deprecatingly, then it means that I am still an idiot in other aspects. Ning Ke said, yes. The street in front of the princess's residence gradually became quiet after the troops and horses left. The snow on the street that had been trampled into dirty water could not be restored to its clean and white appearance for a while. Ning Ke and Cao Xiaoshu walked on the street. The soles of their boots stepped on the snow, making splashing sounds. To kill or not to kill, this is a problem that you have to solve eventually. Cao Xiaoshu said, after all, she is the most beloved daughter of His Majesty. It is best not to kill her if possible. The next chapter, before 11 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 8:16. The quiet street reverberated with the sound of boots stepping on the snow. It sounded monotonous, as if someone was hitting the old bell in the palace with his palm. It was painful to hear the low hum. The crutch under Ning Ke's armpit fell rhythmically on the snow with his footsteps, but did not make any sound. After hearing what Cao Xiaoshu said, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, the academy does not meddle in politics. It is up to the Empress to decide whether to kill her or not. If the academy did not meddle in politics, the Tang Empire would have perished months ago. The academy did not meddle in politics, so the second statement was also empty talk. Cao Xiaoshu said, should I kill Hua Shangyue? Ning Ke said, I want to. Cao Xiaoshu said, the Hua family is a prominent family in Hebei. They are different from the other families in Qinghe County. They have always been loyal to the Tang Empire and have a strong foundation in the army and the court. Especially the 5 camps in Gushan Commandery, they have always been managed by them. In fact, they are still doing so now. Ning Ke said, are you telling me all this to tell me that Hua Shangyue is not easy to kill? Cao Xiaoshu said, you know this too. Otherwise, you would have done it even if I had stopped you. Ning Ke said, I am thinking, if I want to kill Hua Shangyue, should I kill the entire Hua family? Although this answer is a little cruel, it is not unexpected. Cao Xiaoshu said, but there are so many people in the court that you cannot kill. You cannot kill all the officials who support Li Yu, because that would be equivalent to the Tang Empire's destruction. However, once the war subsides, these people will definitely worry that the Empress or the Academy will purge them. So the conflict will continue. Even if Hua Shangyue did not die tonight, similar things will happen in the future. Ning Ke said, I will find a suitable way to deal with it. The two did not continue discussing this matter. After all, the matter or the way to deal with it had an indelible sense of gloom. It was not too harmonious with the snow-white clean street and the hot-bloodedness of these days. Cao Xiaoshu did not like it, and Ning Ke did not want to talk about it at this moment. The two walked in silence, and it did not take long before they arrived at the second street of Spring Breeze Pavilion in the eastern city. Walking into the Chao mansion, Ning Ke greeted Old Master Chao and was then pulled to the side yard by Shengguan Yangyu. Looking at the wretched face of the governor, he slightly raised his eyebrows and said, why did they react so quickly? Shangguan Yangyu stroked his goatee. He looked calm, but his hands were shaking so hard that he almost pulled out his beard. He said, "It's not easy for us to have peace for 2 days. If we don't handle this well, there will be big trouble. What should we do?" Ning Ke looked at him and asked. Shangguan Yangyu panicked under his gaze and said, "If you say it's good, then it's good." Ning Ke smiled and said, "Who found you?" Shangguan Yangyu said, "Neither the Grand Secretary nor the ministers dare to intervene in this matter." "Who else could it be?" "The Chancellor of the Supreme Court is waiting at my house right now." Through the prefectural magistrate's explanation, Ning Ke knew that the Chancellor of the Supreme Judiciary was related to the Hua family by marriage. He thought about it and asked, "What does the Empress mean?" Shangguan Yangyu said, "The Empress asked Mr. 13 to handle this matter." Then he looked around to make sure that no one was spying on them. He said in a low voice, "The young and old of the Hua family are kneeling in front of the palace gate. It seems that they will run until tomorrow morning. What's the point of kneeling now?" Ning Ke said. He understood the meaning of the imperial court. Hua Shanyue's behavior was obviously not approved by the family. At this moment, everyone wanted to keep calm and united. The only place that was qualified to handle this matter and calm the storm was the academy. In other words, it was him. Ning Ke thought of the northern battlefront army officers and soldiers who ambushed the Empress caravan in the northern military camp. He said, "Send the blood cloaks involved to General Su Chi, tell him that I sent them there. Do it according to the previous rule. 10 heads will atone for their crimes. Go back and tell the Chancellor of the Supreme Judiciary that if the war stops, let the Hua family be ready to hand over the military power." Understood. Shangguan Yangyu was thrown out by the Empress to be the middleman, but he did not want to offend the princess's faction too much. After hearing Ning Ke's suggestion, he finally felt relieved and asked, "What about Hua Shanyue?" Ning Ke said, "Throw him over as well." Shangguan Yangyu was finally completely relieved. He was most worried that Ning Ke would insist on killing Hua Shanyue. After all, even the Empress thought that Hua Shanyue could not die at this time. Shangguan Yangyu left the Chao mansion. Ning Ke stood alone in the side courtyard and gently stroked the rough surface of his crutch. Thinking about what happened tonight, he felt that something was wrong. A cough sounded from behind the wintersweet bushes. Old Master Chao walked out. Ning Ke was ready to help him. Old Master Chao waved his hand and said, "You are a dead cripple now. You still want to help me?" Ning Ke smiled and suddenly asked, "Second uncle, what do you think of this matter?" Old Master Chao said, "Why do you ask an old man like me for important matters in the imperial court?" Ning Ke said, "Even the Abbey Dean has to ask you, let alone me." Old Master Chao said, "Tell me." Ning Ke said, "I always feel that it is not right to handle it this way." Old Master Chao said, "Because you are retreating." Ning Ke said thoughtfully, "Yes, I am not used to retreating in the face of worldly affairs." Old Master Chao looked at him and said, "If you want to ask about heaven's way, you should not care about worldly affairs." Ning Ke asked, "So what if worldly affairs always bother you?" Old Master Chao said, "What did you do when the Abbey Dean was in front of you?" There were many braziers in the parlor of the Chao mansion. It was as warm as spring. The disciples of the Fish Dragon gang had suffered heavy casualties in the past few days. The atmosphere in the gang was naturally gloomy. Today, Chao Xiaoshu and Lu Vi had returned. Everyone gathered at the Chao mansion but did not drink too much. Ning Ke and Chi For finished talking about the renovation of the house by the Yanming Lake and glanced at the other side of the table. Chen Lu was drinking hot tea. He did not like to drink because he thought that alcohol was not good for thinking. Ning Ke said that he drank too much soup and went out of the parlor to relieve himself. Not long after, Chen Lu also came out. You are familiar with the military. How is your relationship with the Northern Army? Ning Ke looked at Chen Lu and asked. The bright yellow light shone through the window paper and fell on Chen Lu, leaving a large shadow on his face. After the night at Spring Breeze Pavilion, the relationship between the Fish Dragon Gang and the military was very close. Chen Lu knew that he could not hide anything in this regard, so he said softly, "We can talk." Ning Ke said, "Tell them that I want Hua Shanhua dead." Chen Lu was silent for a long time and then nodded. His nodding movement was very small. If Ning Ke had not stared at him, he would not have noticed it. The two returned to the parlor. Chao Xiaoshu looked at the two and said, "Eat quickly, the meat is almost rotten. There is something wrong with my brain today. I hope it will be better tomorrow." 2 chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 8:17. After eating mutton giblet soup and supper, Ning Ke did not drink much wine. When he walked out of the Chao mansion, he was no longer drunk in the cold wind. However, he still felt restless, or rather, bored. The carriage went to the guest house. He asked the coachman to leave and walked into the garden with the help of his crutch. Through the snow window, he saw Mo Shanshan writing. The candlelight was the same as before, and the girl's eyebrows were still beautiful. He stood quietly outside the window for a long time before he knocked on the door and entered. However, he did not know what to say. Ning Ke wanted to drink with Mo Shanshan, but it was already late at night when he entered the room. He did not know what to say, so he said, "How is Cat Girl now? We talked about marriage." Mo Shanshan was about to pour tea for him. She looked at his expression and could not help smiling. She said, "I want to drink now. Will you keep me company?" They drank a few dishes, 2 bowls of vegetable porridge, and a pot of old wine from the Great River Kingdom. Mo Shanshan asked, "You have a knot between your eyebrows." Ning Ke put down the cup and rubbed his eyebrows. He said, "Is it so obvious?" Mo Shanshan smiled and said, "If not, why would you come to me at night?" Ning Ke was silent for a moment and told her what happened tonight. He did not mention the dirty things he told Chen Qi. He said with emotion, 5 years ago, when I sent Li Yu back to Chang'an, I saw Hua Shanhua for the first time at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road. I did not like him then, and I still don't like him now. However, I did not expect that he would risk his life to save Li Yu. Love is really hard to understand. Love is. Mo Shanshan turned the cup and looked at Ning Ke quietly. She said, "It is hard to understand." Ning Ke was confused by her gaze. He reached out his chopsticks to pick up the fried fish, but the fish slipped from the chopsticks. He put his chopsticks on the table and changed the topic. "The reason why I'm a little depressed is because of the affairs of the world. That day on the snowy street, countless people died, but they died in a refreshing way. Tonight, most of the people survived, but it made me very uncomfortable. Erba Chao told me that if I want to ask for the heaven's way, then ignore the affairs of the world. If the affairs of the world disturb us, then we should cut them down like how we cut the Abbey Dean. It's easy to say, but difficult to do." Mo Shanshan tucked her fine hair behind her ear and said, "On the path of cultivation, everyone will be troubled by these choices. I once had the same problem, but later on, I realized that I am a very greedy person. I want to question the heavenly Tao, I want to reason with the affairs of the world, and I want to ponder over love." She looked up at Ning Ke and said, "That year on the Hua Mountain, I wanted to ask Master Qishan a question, but I didn't. At that time, I thought I had figured it out. However, after returning to the Great River, I sat by the ink lake and looked at the reflection on the water and the flowing clouds in the blue sky. I found that the so-called understanding was just an escape. I was always a little unwilling. This is greed. Because you once said that you like me, and I still like you. Ning Ke was silent for a long time and then said, I like you too. Then he looked at the bamboo outside the window and thought of that long night when he cursed the heavens and the earth by the snow lake. He said, that day she ran away, but she didn't run far, so I could catch her. This time she ran to the sky, too far to come back, so I can't do anything about it. There seemed to be no relationship between these words, but Mo Shanshan understood. Her long eyelashes fluttered slightly, and there was no sadness on her white face, only calmness. I like you, and you like me. That's good. She looked at Ning Ke and said, as for other greed, it might have been possible in the past, but probably not now. I won't feel sad because this is probably God's will. She poured a cup of wine and slowly pushed it in front of Ning Quebec. Then she looked at the night sky outside the window and said with a smile, because she is God. Ning Ke looked at her breathtakingly beautiful face and drank the wine in his cup as a sign of respect. Chang'an City was getting colder and colder, and the winter was getting colder and colder. Time passed slowly and unstoppably. Quietly, the 18th year of Tianqi came to an end. The little emperor had not officially ascended the throne, and the Tang Empire was in the hands of the empress. It would probably take some time before the new year was changed. The war had not completely stopped, and the Tang Empire was still under great pressure. No one knew how many people had died, but the new year had to be celebrated, and it would be more lively. Ning Ke spent the new year in the academy. His senior brothers and sisters at the back of the mountain were injured, disabled, or recovering. The New Year's Eve dinner fell on Mo Shanshan and Tang Xiaotang, with the help of the little attendant. Although the dinner was not ready until the moon climbed up to the top of the mountain, they finally had a hot meal. Everyone drank a lot of wine that night, and toasted to the bright moon several times. If the headmaster had the time to drink the wine toasted by his disciples, he would probably be drunk. It was peaceful and warm, as if everything had happened yesterday. But in fact, everyone felt that the back of the mountain of the academy was missing something important. Perhaps it was the teacher who liked to be a food connoisseur, or perhaps it was Sang Sang who had been in charge of cooking for the past few years. At the turn of the new year, the situation in the world had changed a lot. Because of the cold weather, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court stopped their crazy attack and entered a temporary truce with the Tang army. The Golden Tribe Royal Court set up camp in Kaiping of the 7 stockade villages, while the Tang army stuck to the Xiangwan plain and did not retreat. The king of the Yueluan kingdom, the commander of the army, and other important figures were all killed by eldest brother. The main force of the army was annihilated by the Tang Western Army in front of the Pamir Mountains. The Western Army took the opportunity to break through the Pamir Mountains and directly attacked Chaoyang City, intending to destroy the country. They broke through 17 cities along the way, and only received an urgent letter from Chang'an when they reached the north of Chaoyang City. After reading the letter signed by the imperial court and the academy, General Xu Cheng thought for a while, and then forcibly ordered the army to retreat, despite the shock and opposition of his generals. When the Tang Western Army retreated from Chaoyang City, smoke and dust rose into the sky. The people of the Yueluan kingdom could not believe their eyes. When they were sure that the Tang army would not attack the city again, the entire Chaoyang City became a sea of welcome. Countless people of the Yueluan kingdom wept bitterly, and then began to splash water to celebrate. On the way back, the Tang Western Army was even sent off by the people of the Yueluan kingdom. From time to time, the gentry, people, and monks of the Yueluan kingdom would bring the army provisions, water, and eggs dyed red. The generals of the Western Army, who had firmly opposed the retreat at first, finally realized that the perennial warmth of the country could not be judged by ordinary logic. It was indeed meaningless to conquer them. The most shocking change happened at the Verdant Canyon. For some reason, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, which claimed to have hundreds of thousands of people, began to retreat to the south. They did not try to break through the verdant canyon, nor did they intend to take a detour to the north. Instead, they retreated to Qinghe Prefecture and waited silently for something. The southern army of the Tang Empire rushed thousands of miles to the verdant canyon, abandoning countless supplies along the way. Most of the soldiers even threw their armor deep into the mountains. They were exhausted and held on by sheer willpower. Because of the retreat of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, they finally had a precious chance to breathe. However, the arrival of happiness was so sudden that neither the generals of the Southern Army nor Chang'an understood what had happened. The most powerful coalition army of the Divine Halls had done nothing in this worldwide war against the Tang Empire. To be more precise, they had not played any role and had retreated just like that. Why on earth was that? The Tangs could not understand, and the people of the South Jin Kingdom could not understand, especially the Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom, who had been immersed in extreme grief because of the death of his son. It was impossible for him to understand, so he was very angry. Then he died of anger. After the new year, the news of the death of the Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom spread throughout the world. According to the official statement of the South Jin Kingdom, the great Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom had died of a sudden illness because he had been working too hard on state affairs. He had been reading memorials continuously for 3 days and 2 nights without sleep. The Imperial Center Administration of the Tang Empire had found some other statements in the south. Although they could only confirm some fragments, it was enough for the people in Chang'an to deduce what had happened. On the day before his death, the Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom was furious because of the retreat of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. He summoned the generals of the South Jin Kingdom into the palace and scolded them. He even scolded the dead commander-in-chief Bai Haixin. However, the emperor still could not be happy. He ordered the sword Garrett to send someone to the palace to explain why the Battle of the Verdant Canyon had turned out this way. The Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, was recuperating. With his status, he naturally would not go to the palace to explain. The sword Garrett randomly sent a disciple to the palace. That disciple was called Lu Yiqing. Then, there was no then. The death of the Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom was probably just a simple record in the history books. It was not much different from the gloomy bloodstains in the countless palaces in history. However, in the eyes of those who were observant, the death of the emperor was a very important matter, because it represented a fundamental change in the power structure of the human world. Cultivators did not have enough power to influence the imperial power in the secular world. Many details in the war against the Tang Empire had already proved this. Whether it was the cultivators of the Yan Kingdom, the array tactical masters and sword masters of the Tang army, or the priests of the Golden Tribe royal court, they were not much different from ordinary people in front of the charge of thousands of cavalry and the rain of arrows. It was also this war that proved another possibility. The real powerhouses at the peak of the knowing destiny state could change the color of rivers and mountains once they showed their power. For example, the 3 people who fought in the Verdant Canyon battle. The solemn South Jin Kingdom palace seemed so weak and vulnerable in front of the sword of a blind man. This had something to do with the power of the sword Garrett, but in fact, it proved a fact. The headmaster left the human world and went to heaven. From that day on, the human world was no longer the human world of the past. This was the so-called heavenly earth. The next chapter is almost finished. It will be updated soon. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 8:18. Powerful cultivators like Liu Bai, Jun Mo, and Yi Su had always existed. The world 1,000 years ago was a world of powerful cultivators. Whether royal or ordinary people, they were just pitiful people struggling in the cracks. However, there was a sage every 1,000 years. As the headmaster built the Tang Empire, the West Hill Divine Palace made corresponding changes, and the situation changed fundamentally. With the two mountains of the Academy and the West Hill Divine Palace, even the strongest cultivator had to obey the rules of the secular world. Unless they could surpass the 5 states, they would find that there was always a blue sky above their heads, making it impossible for them to get out. Now that the headmaster had ascended to heaven, heaven did not seem to care about the human world anymore. The West Hill Divine Palace had suffered great losses in the war, and the deterrence of the two mountains and the blue sky was weakening. Under such circumstances, powerful cultivators could naturally breathe more fresh air, not to mention people like Liu Bai, the Sage of Sword, who could surpass the 5 states at any time if he wanted to. Therefore, the Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom died quietly. It was a natural thing because he did not understand the changes in the world. The more powerful the person, the more freedom they had. Once they had the ability to control this freedom over the human world would fall into chaos, just like the barbaric years before the Tang Empire. Now it depended on whether a visiting professor of the Divine Hall like Liu Bai still had enough respect for Haotian Taoism. At the same time, it depended on whether the people in the academy could open an umbrella for the people like the headmaster. Judging from the current situation, the West Hill Divine Palace had been weakened the most in this war. However, the Haotian Taoism sect had ruled the world for countless years, and its foundation was unimaginable. No one knew if there was a hermit in the knowing destiny state hiding in a simple Taoist temple on a mountain. Other than Master Chi Mei, who was seriously injured, the power of the Buddhism sect was not affected much. Neither Qi Nian, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect, nor the soldier monks of the Xiankong temple joined the war. It was because of the Buddhism sect's own philosophy that they would not take the initiative. Other than Taoism and Buddhism sect, the most powerful force in the world was the Golden Palace. Other than the wolf-like cavalry, the nation master and the dozen high priests were enough to deter most cultivators. The sword garret of the South Jin Kingdom had already begun to show its edge. The aristocratic families who had been keeping a low profile for many years now dared to show their faces in this precarious time. The secular world, which had been controlled by the 3 unknown lands for countless years, was bound to become chaotic. No one knew what would happen in the end. If they wanted to see the future of the human world clearly, all the cultivation sects had to keep an eye on the academy in the south of Chang'an City. No matter how silent the academy was now, it was still the academy. In the future, it will be the world of the strong cultivators. Unless the headmaster of the academy returns to the human world, or the West Hill Divine Palace recovers its power in the shortest time possible, there will be chaos for a while. Ning Ke looked into the carriage through the green curtain and said, "You should be soberly aware of this now. Those ministers should also be aware of this and learn to accept reality." In the new year, the situation in Chang'an was chaotic and complicated. When the external pressure exerted on the Tang Empire by the West Hill Divine Palace coalition army and the cavalry of the Golden Palace temporarily disappeared, some hidden problems gradually surfaced in the Tang Empire's seemingly united court. Especially a few days ago, when the news of Hua Shanyue's death came from the front line, the entire Chang'an city was shaken. Hua Shanyue was a descendant of an aristocratic family. He had become the military supervisor of the 3 states of the Gushan Commandery a few years ago. He was very powerful in the army and had a high status. He was expected to become a future general of the Tang Empire. In the Tang Empire's army, dying in battle was not just a tragedy for ordinary soldiers. It was common for generals to die on the battlefield. Generals of a higher rank than Hua Shanyue had been killed by the enemy's arrows countless times in the Tang Empire's thousands of years of history. Logically speaking, the news of Hua Shanyue's death would definitely cause sorrow and regret in the court, but not such a violent shock. But that was not the case. As the military supervisor of the three states, Hua Shanyue did not need to take the lead. At least, he did not need to lead his subordinates into the dangerous battlefield when the war was gradually calming down. Most importantly, everyone knew the reason why Hua Shanyue was sent to the Northern Battlefront Army by the Academy. Therefore, the news of Hua Shanyue's death ignited the anger of the princess's faction in a very short time. After the court meeting the day before yesterday, the white-haired minister of the Ministry of Rights shouted at the palace wall with tears streaming down his face, "Even if he is guilty, how can he die without a trial? Your Majesty, how can you face His Majesty?" The minister of the Ministry of Rights was a bigwig of the princess's faction. There were many people like him in the court. Moreover, the Hua family was an aristocratic family of the Tang Empire and had many close disciples and old friends. If the Empress and the Academy chose to purge the power in the court at this time, it would definitely hurt people's hearts. But if they did not hurt people's hearts, they would inevitably be in chaos. The fact that the Empress was the saintess of the diabolism was still not accepted by many people in the Tang Empire. The most dangerous thing was that if the chaos of the people's hearts was linked to the accusation of the Tang imperial family by Haotian Taoism, it would definitely bring great trouble to the Tang Empire. The West Hill Divine Palace had not launched an attack on public opinion in this regard, but everyone knew that it was only a temporary calm. There were many horse carriages parked in front of the House of Red Sleeves, but it was very quiet inside the building. There was no sound of musical instruments, music, or applause after a dance. There were more than 10 tables in the hall. The people sitting behind the tables were all important figures in the princess's faction. Some of them looked angry, some were thoughtful, and some were calm and silent. No matter what emotions they were feeling, they looked at the table in front of them coldly. The table was placed in front of them, some distance away from the other tables. Ning Kei sat behind the table and quietly looked at the ministers in front of him with different expressions. He was Mr. 13 of the Academy, and no one in the Tang Empire dared to disrespect him. But at this time, no one paid attention to him, so he seemed very lonely. Ning Kei was very used to this kind of loneliness, whether it was in Min Mountain or in the wilderness. He raised the flagon and filled the cup in front of him. He looked at the ministers in front of him and said, "I know what you are thinking. You are not reconciled, or you are not convinced, or you are suspicious of the Empress, or you think that I have done something inappropriate." The ministers slightly raised their eyebrows and thought, "Do you really dare to admit it?" Ning Kei raised his cup and said, "But I will not explain to you, because I don't need to. The law of the Tang Empire is above, and rules must be obeyed. When the Tang army can go south from the verdant canyon, recover the Qinghe River, or go deep into the wilderness and burn the golden tent, we will talk about what happened today." A minister said, "Then why did Mr. 13 ask us to come here today?" Ning Kei said, "I want you to shut up." The minister could not restrain his anger and scolded, "Why do you want us to shut up?" Ning Kei said, "Spreading rumors without evidence is a false accusation. At this time, doing such a thing is tantamount to treason. You should know the seriousness of the matter. If you don't shut up, what do you want to do?" "We want to see Her Highness." "No." Ning Kei said, "Her Highness is a criminal, and no one can see her. If you insist, then tomorrow we will start the trial of Her Highness for tampering with the edict of the late Emperor. Then let's start the trial." The silent minister of the Ministry of Rights finally spoke. His voice was a little tired and sad. He said, "At least I can't watch Her Highness die quietly like General Hua." Ning Kei looked at the wine cup in his hand and was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Then let's see her." As he said this, the bead curtain behind him moved slightly and made a clear and melodious sound. Li Yu, who was wearing a palace dress, walked slowly into the hall accompanied by 2 handmaidens. There was a sudden sound of bowls and plates in the building. More than 10 ministers stood up and looked at Li Yu with shock and excitement. After a while, they came to their senses and bowed to her. This was the first time since the incident that Li Yu had left the princess residence. It was also the first time these people in the court had seen her. At this moment, seeing that Her Highness was in good spirits even though she was a little thin, the ministers finally calmed down. Li Yu looked at these ministers and thought about how these people still did not abandon her even in this situation. She could not help but feel touched. She bowed and said, "Thank you, everyone." The ministers said in unison, "We dare not." Ning Ke held the wine cup and looked at it as if he was an outsider. Then he raised his head and looked at the ministers. He said, "If you still can't calm down, I can promise you that Her Highness will not die quietly like Hua Shangyue. I will let her die in front of you and let everyone in the world see the scene of her death." The ministers were still immersed in the excitement of seeing Her Highness. When they suddenly heard Ning Ke's words, they suddenly felt as if they had been pierced by an ice knife and a chill went straight into their organs. A young general sitting in the corner shouted angrily, "Who dares to touch Her Highness?" Ning Ke drank up the wine in his cup and got up to leave the hall. He walked upstairs. He did not answer the young general, nor did any of the ministers in the hall. It was extremely quiet in the building. Only the sound of people's rapid breathing could be heard. Because of anger, nervousness, and fear, they finally remembered that Ning Ke even dared to kill the emperor. In the room on the top floor of the House of Red Sleeves, the table was covered with embroidered cloth and a celadone bowl was filled with tremella soup. The bottom of the porcelain bowl was placed on the gorgeous peony flower. Ning Ke drank up the tremella soup and wiped his mouth. He said, "I just drank a cup of wine. I don't need to wake up." Mistress Jian said, "The problem is that you didn't eat much of the snacks on the table." Ning Ke then realized that she had been watching what happened downstairs. He said, "I really have no mood to eat these days." Mistress Jian said, "I asked Dewdrop to cook glutinous rice balls. I remember you like them." "Thank you, Aunt Jian." Ning Ke paused for a while and continued, "Tonight's matter, the academy gave Aunt Jian face. Tomorrow is Saturday. 2 chapters for those who asked for leave the day before yesterday. Happy reading this weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 8:19. Mistress Jian said, "This is for the sake of Her Majesty." Ning Ke said, "It involves the academy. Even the Empress has to call me youngest uncle. I don't have to give her face." Mistress Jian looked at him quietly and asked, "Do you really want to kill Li Yu?" Ning Ke said without thinking, "Letting her die is the best choice." "Why?" Mistress Jian asked. Ning Ke explained, "After killing Li Huiyuan and Li Yu, who can the ministers be loyal to even if they are still disloyal? No matter how painful and unwilling they are, they have to obey Her Majesty. In many people's eyes, this war makes it inconvenient for the imperial court and the academy to kill these people. But if you look at it from another perspective, after killing Li Yu, the pressure of the war and the name of righteousness will become pressure on these ministers." After hearing his words, Mistress Jian sighed and said, "I used to think that you and your youngest uncle were very similar. Later, you learned his great spirit, so I thought that you two were more similar. Now I realize that you are 2 different people after all." Ning Ke said, "I can never catch up with youngest uncle in this life, but I believe that I can do better than him in some things, such as the situation the Tang Empire is facing now." Mistress Jian smiled bitterly and said, "So he is dead." Ning Ke said calmly, "I am not afraid of death, but I want the Tang Empire and the academy to live. Mistress Jian looked at him with pity in her eyes. She put her hand on her chest and said after a while, "But have you ever thought that although the prince has a good relationship with Summer, her surname is also Li?" Hearing this name, Ning Ke thought of many things, such as the thick blood in the general's mansion. He said, "In my eyes, he is already dead. I just need the right time." Mistress Jian said, "Your calmness will make people feel afraid." Ning Ke stopped talking about this and asked, "I still want to know why Her Majesty opposes me killing Li Yu. She should not be the kind of person who can be influenced by petty feelings. I really don't know what Summer is thinking." Mistress Jian looked out of the window. It was already dark and a bright moon was hanging above the city wall. She looked confused and asked, "Is the headmaster really gone?" Ning Ke stood up and walked to the window to look at the bright moon. He said, "Who knows?" After a pause, he continued, "Except for him and Haotian, who else knows?" After the new year, Ning Ke stayed in Chang'an. It was not because it was inconvenient to go back and forth to the academy, but for more important reasons. He was waiting for the arrival of the West Hill Divine Palace's diplomatic corps. As spring approached, the Divine Hall's diplomatic corps finally arrived in Chang'an. Under the complicated gazes of the Tangs, the convoy of the diplomatic corps drove through Vermilion Bird Avenue and entered the hotel. The composition of the diplomatic mission was a little complicated. The leader was the head of the Revelation Institute of the West Hill Divine Palace. His two deputies were a prince of the South Jin Kingdom and the prime minister of the Yen Kingdom. It was a little funny, but what was really not funny was that the throne of the South Jin Kingdom and the Yen Kingdom was still empty. The war had temporarily come to an end, but the two armies were still in the north and south of the Tang Empire. The situation was tense, so the negotiation between the two sides quickly began with the arrival of the diplomatic corps. The learned officials of the imperial court of the Tang Empire and the members of the West Hill Divine Palace's diplomatic corps sat on both sides of the long table and began to argue as expected. Of course, there was a need to negotiate. Arguments often depended not on who was more reasonable, but who had more strength. The negotiation between the two sides in the side hall of the imperial palace was only one aspect. The most important, or perhaps the most crucial, place for negotiation was in another place in Chang'an, where there was a rippling lake. Before the battle with the Abbey Dean, Ning Ke walked in the streets with his knife and cut off the traces left by Sang Sang. Naturally, he could not avoid the house by Yanming Lake. Fortunately, the damage was not too serious and it did not take long to repair it. He had been living here since the new year. The thick snow on Yanming Lake had long melted, and the ice became a very thin mirror. Then it shattered and was blown to the shore by the wind, piling up into a snow roll, revealing the clear lake water. Ning Ke stood by the lake and reached out to push away the willow branches that had not yet sprouted green buds. Looking at the faint green stems in the water, he naturally remembered the scene of him and Sang Sang rowing a boat to plant lotus on the lake that summer. The clouds above the lake gradually gathered. There was no sound of spring thunder, but rain quietly fell. This was the first spring rain in Chang'an this year, so it naturally brought with it a bit of chill. Ning Ke walked back to the house and took a towel to wipe the rain off his body. At this moment, he heard someone knocking on the door. He walked to the front of the courtyard and listened to the knocking sound. After a moment of silence, he opened the door. The rain continued to fall, soaking his clothes and the woman outside the door. Ning Ke looked at her and felt as if he had returned to that summer. She did not wear a green Taoist robe, but a blood-red robe of judgment. Her black hair did not look messy because of the wet, as she wore a luxurious crown. But she was still as beautiful as ever. Ning Ke's eyes were very calm, even when he saw the two people behind her. They were Lu Yiqing from the Sword Garret and Xie Chengyun, who was now an official of the Ministry of Rights of South Jin Kingdom. Lu Yiqing and Xie Qingyun bowed to him calmly. Lu Yiqing's eyes were blinded by Ning Quebec. He and Xie Qingyun knew each other in the academy. But as time passed, there was no need to remember many things at this time. The courtyard door slowly closed, and the people accompanying them were all shut outside. Yi Hongyu followed Ning Ke into the house. Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu sat under the rain porch of the plum garden, staring blankly at the spring rain falling from the sky. The sound of rain falling into the Yanming Lake could be faintly heard from the south wall of the courtyard. Now that I think about it, the days when I lived here were indeed peaceful. Yi Hongyu reached out to catch the falling rain and said, but the world is ever-changing, and the peace will not last long. Ning Ke looked at the rain splashing on her white jade-like palm and said, since you became the great divine priest of judgment, your words have become more and more inhuman. Yi Hongyu withdrew her hand, looked at him and said, are you provoking me? Bullshit. Ning Ke handed her the towel and said, you'd better speak human words in front of me. He and Yi Hongyu had known each other in the wilderness for a long time. They had once killed each other, but they had never fallen in love. They had once lived together, but they had never been of the same mind. From the very beginning, they knew that one day, they would kill each other, and they had tried many times. Interestingly, perhaps because they knew this very well, they seemed especially calm when they were together, as if there was a breeze lingering between them, making them feel refreshed. Ning Ke asked, the Abbey Dean and the hierarch are still alive. Do you mean what you say? Yi Hongyu said, since I have come to Chang'an, of course I mean what I say. The problem is that the academy has never been involved in politics. How much influence do you have on the people in Chang'an? Ning Ke said, the token of the devil's doctrine is with me. You know the Empress background, so you don't have to doubt it. Yi Hongyu said, the Tang Empire will pay a great price, and the devil's doctrine demoness will not be able to suppress all the opposing opinions in the court. So what is the point of this agreement? Ning Ke said, first of all, I don't think we will suffer too much from this agreement. Secondly, as for the effectiveness and execution of the agreement, this is something for the academy to consider, not the Divine Hall. Yi Hongyu said, if it is ineffective, then there is no point in negotiating. Ning Ke said, negotiation itself is the point. Yi Hongyu said, that's boring. You have become so lifeless and stale because of a woman. It's ridiculous. Ning Ke's expression did not change. He said calmly, Haotian Taoism rules the world and claims to have countless powerhouses. Isn't it even more ridiculous that a woman like you has to risk her life in Chang'an? Yi Hongyu said, what danger is there in Chang'an for me? Ning Ke said, I can kill you at any time. Yi Hongyu said, in the swamp, if not for those wild horses, you would have been killed by me. Ning Ke said, this is not the mud field in the wilderness. This is Chang'an. Yi Hongyu's eyes turned cold. She said, so what? Ning Ke said calmly, I am invincible in Chang'an. Even the Abbey Dean will be sent flying by me. I don't think you have any chance of defeating me. Yi Hongyu said, but don't forget, no one can defeat Haotian. Ning Ke wanted to say that he had bullied Haotian badly in the igloo by the hot sea in the far north, but he did not say it in the end. This was a matter between him and Sang Sang, and had nothing to do with anyone else. Fighting with heaven is endless joy. He thought of his teacher's words and suddenly had a new understanding. He could not help but laugh. Yi Hongyu said, if the headmaster could really defeat Haotian, he would not become the moon, but the new Haotian. Ning Ke said, this speculation seems to be correct, but it is completely wrong. Because you do not understand what kind of person the headmaster is. He has no interest in becoming the sky and covering everyone's head. He would rather turn into light and shine on the world, feeling the joys and sorrows of this world. The conversation in the spring rain was not a test. It was to determine the tone of the negotiation. It was not to guess the other party's bottom line, but to know what the other party wanted and where the rain would flow. Since some of the spring rain fell into Yanming Lake, and some seeped into the soil under the plum bushes, it seemed that they could not gather in one place in a short period of time. Then they needed to talk about something more specific. At this moment, Ning Ke raised his hands and reached to her temples, as if he wanted to touch her cheeks. Yi Hongyu did not react, as if she did not see his hands. Ning Ke asked, "Don't you feel heavy now?" Yi Hongyu said, "Of course, but there is no one to help me carry it." Ning Ke took the divine crown off her head and said, "Hurry up and find someone else." Yi Hongyu's wet black hair scattered on the divine robe, making her look even more beautiful. She looked at Ning Ke and said, "Where can I find someone as shameless as you? I have to go out for the whole day today, so I did not have time to write. I worked hard to write these 2 chapters last night. I really admire my hard work, and these 2 chapters are definitely in my favorite style. The next chapter will be updated soon. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 820. Negotiation was a battle. The one who proposed the conditions first would be the one to make the first move. Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu were good at fighting. They knew that the one who proposed the conditions first would gain the upper hand in the battle. That was why they thought that they should be the ones to propose the conditions first. "This is Chang'an, my home ground," Ning Ke said. Yi Hongyu looked at him quietly and said, "The Tang Empire is in danger now. The cavalry of the Golden Palace and the Divine Hall Coalition Army are still in your territory." Ning Ke said, "This is a little troublesome, but it is not the key. I heard that the Abbey Dean, the hierarch, and your brother are all crippled. I really don't understand why you are so confident." Yi Hongyu said, "The situation in the academy should be worse. Mr. Second lost his right arm. I heard that Mr. First and the 23-year cicada cultivation are still in wheelchairs. As for your other disciples, I saw their injuries in front of the verdant canyon. I know they won't be able to recover in a short time." Ning Ke looked at her and said seriously, "You forgot about me." Yi Hongyu looked at him and said calmly, "The problem is that you can't leave Chang'an. You may be invincible here, but there are many people in Haotian Taoism who can kill you if you leave Chang'an." Yes, Ning Ke had never left Chang'an since the new year. This was the only place where he could borrow the power of the God-stunning array through the array I pestle. Even though he was also a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state, he was not powerful enough to affect the entire world. Yi Hongyu continued, "Haotian Taoism has existed for thousands of years. Even though the waves are a little dim now, I can find you 10 cultivators in the knowing destiny state at any time if you want to see them." If she was not exaggerating, this was enough to scare most people in the world. After all, there was not even one cultivator in the knowing destiny state in some small countries. But this was not enough to scare Ning Quebec. He said, "Even if there is a day when there are so many cultivators in the knowing destiny state and Tianqi state, it will be meaningless. If they dare to come to Chang'an, I will kill them all. If they are not in the Abbey Dean state, they are just courting death." Yi Hongyu said, "Will you stay in Chang'an for the rest of your life?" Ning Ke felt that these words sounded like a wedding vow. He smiled and said, "If it's really necessary, I have to do it. Fortunately, there are wine, meat, and beauties in Chang'an. It won't be too boring." It seemed like they were fighting over who could make the first offer, but in fact, both of them had already placed their chips on the table. Ning Ke did not wait for Yi Hongyu to continue and suggested, "Let's play rock paper scissors. This is fair and simple." Yi Hongyu frowned slightly. Ning Ke said, "You are the Tao addict." You are said to know everything. Don't you know how to play the finger-guessing game? You should know that rock-paper-scissors is also a way to win or lose. It is very particular about spirit, boldness, and calculation. Before he could finish, Yi Hongyu asked, "What fist?" Ning Ke said, "Lewd fists." Yi Hongyu asked, "What fist is this?" Ning Ke said, "You want to learn? I can teach you." Unsurprisingly, Yi Hongyu lost. Although she was a Tao addict who knew everything, she was no match for Ning Ke in terms of gambling. One had to know that Ning Ke had gambled since he was young. He had gambled from the city of Wei to Chang'an. After experiencing hardships and even narrowly escaping death, he was finally able to cultivate. The first thing he thought of was to win money at the gambling shop. Yi Hongyu was very angry. It was not only because she did not like to lose, but also because she finally understood the meaning of lewd in the lewd fists. It was actually the word lewd. Ning Ke explained, "This is a culture that has a long history. I'm not trying to take advantage of you." Yi Hongyu took a deep breath of the slightly cold air. The moisture of the spring rain moistened her lungs, allowing her to finally control her emotions. She thought that there was indeed no other person in the world who was as shameless as Ning Quebec. The Divine Hall Coalition Army has withdrawn from Qinghe Prefecture. We have to take back Qinghe Prefecture. Ning Ke's expression became serious. He said, "There is no room for discussion on this matter." Yi Hongyu's expression did not change. No one could tell what she was thinking. She asked, "What about the surnames?" Ning Ke said, "Of course we have to kill them all." Yi Hongyu was still non-committal. She said, "Continue." Ning Ke said, "The Yen Kingdom has respectfully returned the remains of the soldiers of the Northeast Border Military. Crown Prince Chongming has come to Chang'an to ask for forgiveness. He has knelt in front of the coffin for an entire night. We have no more requests. Continue. In order to express the sincerity of the Tang Empire and its attitude of peace, we are willing to withdraw from the Yueluan Kingdom. But the Pamir Mountains must be given to us. Also, the Great River Kingdom must obtain permanent neutrality. Anything else? Nothing else. Do you want to hear the Divine Hall's conditions? To be honest, I really don't want to hear it. Because neither the Academy or the Imperial Court will agree to it. But you still have to listen in the end. It's already noon. Let's eat first. Ning Ke asked Yi Hongyu to change out of the divine robe of judgment. It was a little sad that Yi Hongyu's clothes were still in the plum garden. The two walked to the Yanming Lake and walked along the wooden bridge among the reeds to the west. They walked to the street and left Lu Yiqing and Xie Chengyun who were in front of the courtyard. Ning Ke bought a few sesame cakes on the street and continued to walk to the southern city with her. On the way, they saw many people holding crutches and many injured soldiers. Most of the injured soldiers were carried back from the front line. They looked very miserable with broken limbs. Most of the people were injured on the day the Abidine entered Chang'an. The entire city is filled with people holding crutches. Yi Hongyu said, "The Tang Empire is already in such a miserable state. Why does the Academy still have to hold on?" Ning Ke said, "The same scene can be interpreted differently. In the eyes of the Divine Hall, so many injured people holding crutches is enough to prove that the Tang Empire is about to collapse. But in my eyes, it proves that the Tang Empire is still very strong because we have the ability to save the injured from the front line. Most importantly, even the most ordinary Tangs dare to fight against such a terrifying enemy like the Abidine. The entire city is filled with people holding crutches? No, in my eyes, they are not crutches. They are all knives, very sharp knives." Yi Hongyu said nothing more. Ning Ke stopped at the entrance of the Shishir Alley in the southern city. There were two big trees at the entrance of the alley. One was an unknown tree, and the other was an unknown tree. They were gradually turning green in the spring breeze. Yi Hongyu asked, "Has the calligraphy addict left?" Ning Ke said, "She is studying with eldest brother in the academy." Yi Hongyu said, "If we want to ask about heaven's way, how can we be trapped by love? I was thinking about this a few days ago." Ning Ke walked to the tree and looked for green buds among the bare branches, but found it difficult. "We saw these two trees turning green in the spring breeze, but now it is difficult to find green buds under the tree. Heaven's way is like spring, which can only be seen from afar. Small things like love are like green buds. You can see heaven's will, but you can't catch it. It is because you don't want to lower yourself to the dust, and you don't want to put your eyes on the bare and ugly bark. Heaven's way is a small matter." He looked at Yi Hongyu and frowned slightly. "I didn't see second brother fight with Liu Bai and Yi Su in front of the verdant canyon, but you saw it. Don't tell me your thoughts haven't changed." Yi Hongyu thought of what her brother said before he left and fell silent. Everyone's way is different. Teacher's way is against heaven's way. What is yours? Ning Ke looked at her and said, "What are you pursuing in this life? In the past, you wanted to catch up with your brother and become a powerhouse in Haotian Taoism. You wanted your brother to be the Abbey Dean. But what's the point of being the Abbey Dean? You still wandered around the South Sea for decades and couldn't even return to the Jishou Abbey. Later, you wanted to become the strongest and surpass your brother. But what's the point? You and I may be the two best at fighting in this world. No one in the same state can be our match. But have you ever thought that I can't become the headmaster, and you can't become as strong as the Abbey Dean? Then what's the point of cultivating like this?" Yi Hongyu said, "Not everything needs to be interesting." Ning Ke said, "Teacher once said that we don't live to have meaning, but to be interesting." Yi Hongyu said, "I live to become stronger." Ning Ke asked, "I once desired to become stronger because I wanted to survive with Sang Sang. I also wanted to take revenge, so I had an obsession. But you grew up in the Jishou Abbey and then went to the Revelation Institute on the Peach Mountain. Finally, you entered the judicial department until today. Your life has been smooth sailing. Where did your obsession come from?" Yi Hongyu said calmly, "Not everything needs a reason. Becoming stronger can be understood as an instinct. Just like how an ant sees two green leaves, it also wants to take the bigger one. As a cultivator, I am not interested in power or profit. But I always like the feeling when I stand on the top of the mountain and look at the scenery." Ning Ke thought of the time when he successfully climbed the mountain and saw the scenery on the top of the mountain. At that time, the starlight was like silver, the clouds were floating between the cliffs, and there were a few mountain peaks in the distance. It was extremely beautiful. That feeling is really good. He agreed with Yi Hongyu. Yi Hongyu said, "You didn't kill Li Yu. Aren't you worried about internal strife?" Ning Ke looked at the calm passers-by on the street and said, "Is it possible for you to see internal strife in Chang'an? The Divine Hall has many spies in Chang'an. You should know that I can kill her at any time. I just don't want to for now." "So you don't want to kill her, or you can't bear to kill her?" Yi Hongyu said, "You don't want to kill her because of her relationship with the Golden Tribe Royal Court. You haven't mentioned the Golden Tribe Royal Court before. It seems that you have already made arrangements for the North." Ning Ke said, "I don't have any arrangements." Yi Hongyu said, "The Divine Hall has an influence on the Golden Tribe Royal Court that the Academy can't imagine." Ning Ke said, "Isn't it just the everlasting heaven? When I passed by the wilderness last year, I felt something strange. After that, I asked someone to investigate and found out that the Divine Hall has been preaching in the Golden Tribe Royal Court all these years. It's really interesting. Did Hao Tian think that no one would recognize him after he changed his identity?" Yi Hongyu didn't expect that he already knew about this. She said, You have no arrangements for the north and rejected the divine hall's good intentions. What do you think about the Golden Tribe Royal Court? Ning Ke said, I only have one thought about the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Yi Hongyu asked, what is it? Ning Ke said, kill them all. I wish everyone a happy weekend. 2 more chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 821. This sentence itself and the unspoken meaning hidden in it were very bloody and cruel. However, Ning Ke's tone was very calm and normal, as if it was a matter of course. He looked calm and even had a sincere smile on his face. To him, there was nothing to talk about with the Golden Tribe Royal Court. He would not accept anything other than being killed. Even Yi Hongyu felt a chill at this moment. Spring had just arrived, and some of the green buds on some trees were so small that they were hard to see with the naked eye, while some of the trees had already sprouted tender green leaves. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind blew on the street, snapping the tender stems and causing green leaves to fall. Qingye landed on the ground from the sky, and the conversation finally came to an end. Yi Hongyu raised the demands of the West Hill Divine Palace, which were in direct opposition to the conditions that Ning Ke had raised by the Yanming Lake. The Divine Palace wanted to ensure the independence of Qinghe Prefecture, and they wanted the Tang Empire to pay a large amount of war reparations, and the royal family had to go to Peach Mountain to apologize. The Golden Palace wanted the large pasture around Xiangwan Plain and Helan City. As for Yueluan, Yan, Jin, Qi, and Song, they naturally had their own demands, but they were relatively unimportant. After a moment of silence, Ning Ke asked, what's going on with Longqing now? 2,000 elite cavalrymen were annihilated. Although he was lucky enough to survive, he was heavily injured and is currently recuperating in the Divine Hall. I don't know when he will recover. Yi Hongyu did not like Longqing at all. Her expression did not change when he was mentioned, but she did not understand why Ning Ke would suddenly mention him. She said, although his cultivation state is above yours, you should not be so vigilant. Ning Ke said, asking doesn't mean being vigilant. Yi Hongyu said, then why ask him? A few years ago in Chang'an, I said something to him. Ning Ke said, I told him at that time that you were really beautiful. In that case, don't think too much about it. Yi Hongyu remained silent. Ning Ke looked at her and said with a smile, everyone knows that Tao Addict is the most beautiful woman in the world. So I shouldn't be too optimistic? Yi Hongyu said, no matter how strong you are in your words, no matter how unwilling you are, you still have to accept these conditions. Ning Ke said with a smile, I don't see any reason to promise you. Yi Hongyu said, I can't tell either. But someone told me that you would agree. Ning Ke slightly raised his eyebrows and asked, who? Abby Dean? Yi Hongyu did not answer his question and turned to leave the green tree. Ning Ke did not leave with her. He looked at the green leaves on the ground and his frown deepened. Yi Hongyu's last 2 sentences made him feel uneasy. The negotiation between the diplomatic corps of the West Hill Divine Palace and the Tang Empire continued in the side hall of the palace. The two sides had too much difference in judgment of the situation, and there was no way to find a mutually acceptable solution. It was only suitable for the situation at the table, not for the negotiation. Therefore, the two sides continued to talk. Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu were still watching the spring rain in the house by the Yanming Lake. They chatted about trivial things, testing each other's patience, and wanted to determine each other's confidence and bottom line. During this time, Crown Prince Chongming finally ascended the throne in Qingjing City and became the new emperor of the Yan Kingdom. He successfully subdued the power of Long Qing's faction and began to focus on internal affairs. The South Jin kingdom also became peaceful. Under the powerful deterrence of the sword Garrett, especially under the influence of the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, the royal family and the military that had been restless became much more rational. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army did not completely retreat to their respective countries. Instead, they continued to stay in Qinghe Prefecture. The Qinghe warlords provided food and logistics to maintain a sufficient deterrence to the Tang Empire. After the Tang Empire's western army retreated to the Pamir Mountains, the Yueluan kingdom, which had suffered a military shortage for the first time in countless years, finally recognized their position. They kept a low profile, as if there was no such country in the world. The monks of the White Tower Temple began to prepare for the election of a new emperor, while the Xiankong Temple did not express any opinion. The world seemed to have gotten rid of the threat of war, but no one forgot the north. The cavalry of the Golden Palace, after surviving the cold winter in the 7 stockade villages, began to move again in the spring. The soldiers and civilians of the Tang Empire all stared at the north. Although they were vigilant, they were not as nervous as they were at the beginning of the war. As time went by, the power of the Tang Empire was gradually recovering. Smoke rose from the fields of the eastern border. The northern battlefront army's armor was brand new, and their new weapons were very sophisticated. Caravans carrying food and supplies kept going back and forth on the well-connected roads of the Tang Empire. The mines and workshops were in full swing. The curfew in Chang'an was lifted, and smiles gradually appeared on people's faces. The negotiation was a competition of patience and confidence in time. The Tang Empire never lacked confidence in this aspect. From the visible changes, it seemed that the victory was in their favor. Mo Shanshan sat by the stream, reading an old book. The eldest brother sat beside her, fishing with a fishing rod. His cotton-padded jacket gently fluttered in the breeze. He did not change his posture for a long time, as if he had fallen asleep. The stream was a mountain stream, flowing from the pool formed by the waterfall in the cliff. The second brother stood by the pool, looking at the waterfall behind the pool with a serious expression. The big white goose floated in the pool, its red paws plucking the water from time to time. It looked at the waterfall like the second brother, with a serious and mocking expression. There were 2 pairs of crutches by the pool, and 2 teenagers under the waterfall. Zhang Nianzu and Li Guangdi were squatting under the waterfall. They had not fully recovered from their injuries, and when they were hit by the strong cold water, their faces turned even paler, as if they were going to fall at any time. In fact, they had fallen many times, but when they saw Mr. Second standing by the pool, and especially the hateful big white goose, they still clenched their teeth and held on. They walked along the stones behind the pool, passed through the narrow gorge, and arrived at the precipice behind the mountain. A wheelchair was parked on a small stone platform. Yu Lian sat in the wheelchair, holding a pen and paper in her hand. She was writing the hairpin-style small regular script. Although there was no writing desk, her handwriting on the paper was still so neat. When her eyes were tired, she would look at the flowing clouds in front of the precipice and Chang'an city in the distance for a short rest. Sometimes, she would look at the narrow stone path above the precipice. The stone path led to the cliff cave where Ning Kei used to practice in seclusion. It was very narrow, and it was very dangerous to walk on it. When the strong mountain wind blew, one could fall into the abyss at any time. Tang Xiaotang was on the stone path at this time. What she needed to do was to use the blood-colored giant knife in her hand to chisel the rock wall and widen the ladder on the stone path. This was a very meaningful work, but also a very difficult one. The rocks between the precipice were very hard. Even though she had cultivated the devil's doctrine since childhood and possessed great strength, it was still difficult for her to chisel it. What annoyed her most was that the result of Yu Lian jumping into the blue sky and cutting off the rainbow in the Battle of Chang, and was that the blood-colored giant knife in her hand had been destroyed beyond recognition. She had been chiseling on the stone path on the precipice for more than 10 days, but she had only completed less than 1/10 of it. Looking up, she could not see the end of the steep mountain path. The melon shed in front of the cliff cave was still a small black dot. The little white wolf was lying on the stone ladder above and dozing off. Listening to the sound of chiseling coming from below, it felt a little annoyed. It was not worried that it would break the stone chips, because according to the speed of the past few days, it would take at least a few days for Tang Xiaotang to chisel to where it was sleeping now. Song Qian and the 8th younger brother were playing chess with bandages. One hand was gently plucking the strings of the zither. That was the only hand that Bei Gong could move. Wang Qi was brewing medicine in the yard. There were all kinds of flowers and herbs piled up in the corner. After a while, the old yellow bull came in with a head full of wildflowers. The 4th brother, Fan Yu, was coughing and discussing the god-stunning array with Mu Yu. The 6th brother looked at the iron stove that had been out for many days and sighed. Those who taught were teaching, those who educated were educating, and those who were tortured were destined to continue to be tortured. The scholars were still reading, and the recuperating were still recuperating. The back of the mountain of the academy was peaceful and warm. Suddenly, the eldest brother opened his eyes. He looked at the mountain stream under the stone and slowly lifted the fishing rod in his hand. There was no hook on the line. The eldest brother never used a hook when fishing, not even a straight one. But now when he lifted the fishing rod, there were 3 grass carps on the line. The 3 grass carps were suspended in the air beside the line, struggling desperately. They were not tied to anything, but they could not break free no matter how hard they struggled. Their tails flicked, and the water droplets that were thrown out refracted the sunlight on the stream. It was very beautiful. The eldest brother shook his wrist slightly, and the 3 grass carps were finally freed and fell into the stream. He looked at the stream quietly and suddenly said to Mo Shanshan, "Take your time to read it. If there is anything you don't understand, just read it first. Ask me when I come back." Mo Shanshan's expression changed slightly. She sensed that something had happened. She closed the old book and walked to the eldest brother. She said, "I'll go with you." The eldest brother looked at her and smiled gently. He said, "It's not a big deal. It's just a little sudden." The eldest brother left the stream in a wheelchair and walked out of the clouds on the mountainside. The expression on his face was very solemn, not as calm as usual, so he arrived very quickly. Yu Lian was even faster than him. She was wearing a light yellow dress, sitting in a wheelchair and looking in the direction of Chang'an. A cold wind blew on the mountain path, stirring up layers of yellow leaves in the autumn and the hem of her dress. Yu Lian said, "I didn't expect that he would really come." The eldest brother said, "The headmaster is gone, so they can come as they like. What I don't understand is why they came." Yu Lian said, "I don't understand either. It seems that we can only ask them face to face." The eldest brother said gently and firmly, "I am the senior brother, so I should be the one asking." Yu Lian said, "Senior brother, you are really slow now, so I have to go." Someone had come to Chang'an. They didn't know who it was. The eldest brother and Yu Lian knew, so they wanted to meet him. They looked very serious and serious, even more serious than when they faced the Abbey Dean. Who was that person? I'll try to finish the next chapter before 12:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 822. There was a rustling sound on the mountain path. The female professor walked to eldest brother and Yu Lian, put down the broom in her hand, and patted the dust off her green gown. Her wrinkled face was full of calmness. She said, "Since you are all like this, I should go." She had not been involved in the world for many years. When the world was fighting against the Tang Empire, she could only watch silently because of her family background. However, that person had come to Chang'an today, and even she could not sit still in the classroom. At this moment, Junemo walked out of the mountain fog and said, "Stop fighting. Senior brother and junior sister have not recovered, and you are also old. It should be me." The female professor said, "How rude of you." At this moment, the 4 people present were the 4 strongest people in the academy. That person had come to Chang'an, so the academy would naturally let them receive him. However, they all knew that once he left, it would be hard to predict what would happen, so they argued. Junemo was silent. The female professor stared into his eyes and said, "Even if you are in your best condition, you are still no match for him. My sword has never asked for perfection." Junemo said, "So many people who are stronger than me still lost to me. Even Lu Bai did not take advantage of me." The female professor stopped talking when Lu Bai was mentioned, and the wrinkles on her face deepened. "Come out," Junemo said. Following these words, Zhang Nianzu and Li Guangdi walked out of the clouds. This was the first time they had walked out of the cloud gate formation alone, so they were a bit excited. However, the pool water was extremely cold, and their faces were pale. They looked extremely miserable. Junemo looked at eldest brother and Yu Lian in the wheelchair and said, "Stop fighting. I want to bring them back to Chang'an, so it is on the way to see that person. I have a reason, so I will go." Yu Lian said, "Why do you want to bring them back to Chang'an?" Junemo thought for a while and said, "Home visit?" The atmosphere in the carriage was very depressing because Junemo did not say anything. Zhang Nianzu and Li Guangdi secretly exchanged glances and vaguely guessed that something big had happened in Chang'an. They became nervous and did not dare to talk. They kept their mouths shut and looked at the scenery outside the window. There were only spots of green in the tree branches beside the road. The 2 teenagers looked along the neat trees and saw the city wall of Chang'an City in the distance. At noon, the south gate of Chang'an should have been very busy. The soldiers of the city patrol department should have been carefully checking the people coming in and out. The people in the queue should have been complaining about the speed of entering the city, and the peddlers selling herbal tea and eggs could not stop drinking. However, it was unusually quiet today. In the daytime, the 2 heavy and mountainous city gates were tightly shut. There were no pedestrians, no hawkers, no soldiers of the city patrol division, not a single person in front of the city gates. There was only one carriage. The carriage looked very ordinary. It was covered with mud and dust, and had no luster to speak of. Occasionally, a chilly spring breeze would blow off some of the dust on the carriage, revealing the dark color inside. It seemed to be made of steel, and a few smooth lines could be vaguely seen. There were no horses in the black carriage, only a single carriage. The place where the wheels touched the ground had sunk deeply, and fine gravel could be seen on both sides. Looking back, one could see that the hard stone surface of the state highway had been crushed into 2 very deep marks, stretching to a very far place, with no end in sight. How heavy was this carriage? How could the road be so damaged? What was more eye-catching than the carriage was the person standing beside it. Since there were no horses, could it be that he had pulled such a heavy carriage so far with his bare hands? The person was wearing an ordinary cloth gown. His eyes were ordinary, and there were a few wrinkles at the corner of his eyes. However, his skin was very delicate, and his hair was a little gray. If one looked closely, one would find that his black hair revealed a sense of youth. It was hard to tell how old he was, or whether he was young or old. A flagon was tied to the person's waist, swaying gently with the spring breeze. He seemed to be waiting for someone. Feeling a little bored, he picked up the flagon and took a sip. When he drank, his expression was very heroic, like a whale drinking seawater. He did not put down the flagon for a long time, but the flagon never reached the bottom, and there was always wine pouring out. On the city wall, countless crossbows were aimed at the drinking man, but no one dared to shoot. Because the man did not care that he was being aimed at by the powerful crossbows. He minded his own business, drinking alone in the spring breeze, as if he did not exist in this world. The man put down the flagon, wiped his mouth, and narrowed his eyes. His slightly narrowed eyes were full of intoxication, because in this life, there was nothing else he loved but wine. However, if one looked at the deepest part of his eyes, one could see that his eyes were so cold and full of vicissitudes, because in his long life, he had already seen through everything, and was long tired of this world, so he was heartless. The sound of hooves gradually slowed down, and another carriage arrived in front of the city gate. Zhang Nianzu squeezed to Li Guangdi's side, and the two youths looked at the man through the window. Their bodies could not help but tremble, and their faces were extremely pale, because they seemed to see the Taoist in indigo on the street that day. Jun Mo lifted the curtain in front of the carriage, and got off. He walked in front of the man, and slowly stopped. The spring breeze caressed the empty sleeve below his right arm, his posture was gentle, but his breath was cold. The iron sword was in the sheath at his waist, and he did not pull it out. Jun Mo looked at the man beside the black carriage, and his eyes fell on the flagon at his waist. After a long silence, he bowed his head and said, "Greetings, Senior." The man was somewhat satisfied, and said, "No need to be so polite." It was a simple sentence, but it made the South City gate tremble. This was because the man's voice was very old, extremely old, and when the air passed through his vocal cords, it was like bronze covered in dust rubbing against each other. Even if the dust and dirt were rubbed off, it was followed by the friction of the rust on the bronze, which made everyone's soul throb. Zhang Nianzu and Li Guangdi did not get off the carriage. After hearing this voice, their faces became even paler, and their bodies suddenly became as cold as ice, as if they had suddenly arrived at the age of death from their youth. Countless painful groans came from inside the city wall. The Tang soldiers who aimed at the man with crossbows were shocked by this voice, and even the moss-covered bricks of the city wall showed some signs of loosening. The city wall had withstood thousands of years of wind and rain, but it was still too young before this old voice. Jun Mo raised his head, and his expression was still calm, without any respect in his eyes. He said, "Leave, or die." The spring breeze blew again, and the flagon on the man's waist swayed again. He was a little surprised, and then became indifferent again. He looked at Jun Mo and said, "I heard that you value etiquette the most. I have already paid my respects to Senior, so I don't need to be more polite." Jun Mo looked at the man and said, "Etiquette is based on respect. I paid my respects to you because of your seniority. My teacher once asked you, but it was based on the order, not you." The man slightly raised his eyebrows, and said indifferently, "Why am I not worthy of respect?" Jun Mo said, "Because you are a coward." With this sentence, the chi of heaven and earth in front of the South City gate suddenly changed dramatically. The spring breeze turned into a bone-chilling wind. Jun Mo's empty sleeve swayed in the spring breeze, as if it had been starched too many times, suddenly stiffened, and the soft lines on the sleeve became extremely sharp lines. His right arm was broken, but he still had his sleeve. He did not draw his sword, but his sleeve was still full of sword wills. In the sudden cold spring breeze, there were countless sharp sword wills. In the carriage, Zhang Nianzu and Li Guangdi's faces became even paler, because they found that there seemed to be many sharp lines in the air, and every breath was so painful. Countless sword marks appeared in front of the man. The wine flask at his waist suddenly emitted countless clear sounds before gradually fading away. He looked at Jun Emo and said, "His taste in accepting disciples is indeed much better than ours." Jun Emo said, "My teacher is much better than you two at everything." After saying this, he stretched his left hand to his waist, held the middle of the scabbard, and held the sword horizontally in front of him. The iron sword was still at the same level as his eyebrows, and he seemed to be respectful, but in fact, he was as cold as ice. Jun Emo performed the junior salute. He held the sword horizontally in front of him, and his expression was solemn. The iron sword was square and wide, and in the wind, it was like an indestructible city wall. The shadow of the iron sword and the sleeve fell on the ground, and it was like a solemn and continuous green mountain. You guarded the verdant canyon for 7 days, defeated Yisu, and then injured Lu Bai. You are indeed extraordinary. The man saw Jun Emo holding the sword horizontally, and his expression became more serious. But only a little. He waved his sleeve, and the spring breeze came, lingering around him. His aura suddenly increased, and he broke through 5 states in a flash. No one knew which mountain he was on. He was not in the city, so the city wall could not stop him. He was not in the Green Mountain, so the Green Mountain could not see him. He did not want to fight, and even someone as strong as Jun Emo could not fight. What state was this? My teacher said that in terms of this state, even Buddha is not as good as you. Jun Mo's gaze passed through the sword and fell on the man. He said, "Since you don't want to fight, why are you here?" The man looked at him and said, "I came to Chang and to return something to the academy." Jun Emo asked, "What is it?" The man said, "It's this carriage." Jun Emo said, "I have arrived. You can leave now." The man asked, "Is this carriage yours?" Jun Emo said, "No." The man said, "In that case, I am not looking for you." Jun Emo said, "Since it is youngest brother's carriage, I can make the decision." The man shook his head slowly, and took a sip from the flagon on his waist. He looked back at the old modeled city wall and said, "No, because you can't make the decision for this city." Jun Emo looked at him and did not speak. He only had one hand holding the scabbard, so he could not hold the hilt. The iron sword was pulled out of the scabbard by itself, and with a slight sound of friction, it was about to show its sharpness. At this moment, the sound of friction came from the city gate, and then it slowly opened. 2 more chapters tomorrow. Please vote for me on Monday. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 823. The city gate opened slowly and Ning Kai showed up. He carried the iron cutlass on his back and held the iron pestle in his hand. He stood in the city gate and looked outside. He said, "Senior brother, since he is here for me, I will talk to him." Jun Emo pondered for a moment. His eyebrows were like the surface of a lake covered by the shade of willow trees. The broad and straight iron sword slowly returned to its sheath. He bowed to the man beside the carriage again and walked back to his own carriage. The carriage entered Chang'an and stopped beside Ning Quebec. Jun Emo looked at him and said, "Since you want to talk, you should talk nicely. Although the headmaster is no longer in the world, the academy is still here. Such a coward is not qualified to disturb us." Ning Kai bowed and said calmly, "I understand." He looked at the old and dirty carriage outside the city gate. He saw the black steel walls of the carriage that had been blown away by the spring wind and the familiar seal lines. Then he looked at the man beside the carriage. Only second brother dares to say that this man is a coward. Ning Kai thought to himself because he knew who this man who seemed to ignore time was. This man had appeared in the headmaster's conversation and in his dream. He once had a dream. In that dream, he came to the wilderness. Everyone in the wilderness looked up at the sky where light and darkness separated. He saw the tall figure of his teacher, a drunkard, and a butcher. Then he had another dream. That time the headmaster snatched the wine bag from the drunkard and took a sip. Then he snatched a pig leg from the butcher's back and ate it. The headmaster once mentioned in a conversation in the back of the mountain of the academy that there were two grand cultivators who had experienced the everlasting night. One was the drunkard and the other was the butcher. They were the two people in his dream. Last year, he took Sang Sang to the wilderness in a black carriage and saw the battle between the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army and the Desolate Man. At that time, he realized that this was the place he saw in his dream. In the dream that became reality, he saw the confrontation between light and darkness in the sky. He saw the divine kingdom of light and the giant golden dragon head behind the clouds. The headmaster was indeed tall. But he did not see the drunkard or the butcher until today. The drunkard and the butcher were able to survive the long everlasting night and live eternally under the gaze of Haotian, which meant that they had the means to defeat Haotian. In the words of the headmaster, cultivation was a competition of who lived the longest. Therefore, the states of these two people had undoubtedly reached an unimaginable level. In the words of the headmaster, these two people were probably not human anymore. Among the people Ning Ke knew, except for the headmaster, no one had seen the drunkard and the butcher. Perhaps only the headmaster could find them. As long as they were alive, they would be legends in the human world. The man was carrying a wine pot, but there was no pig leg on his back. Naturally, he was not the butcher. Ning Ke was not an ordinary person, but he was still shocked and vigilant when looking at this man. After a while, he calmed down and asked, "Senior drunkard, what can I do for you?" The drunkard looked at him and said in a hoarse voice, "Someone asked me to return something to you." His voice was still so unpleasant to hear, as if every word carried the accumulated soil of the tombs of ancient kings and the smell of silk soaked in corpse water. Ning Ke frowned slightly. Second brother had asked him what it was, but he did not ask again. Looking at the horse carriage that had accompanied him for many years and the tracks on the official road, he naturally thought of what had happened by the Sisui River. At the Sisui River, Sang Sang showed her true immortal body. She was in the dark night and stepped on the light like a white lotus. She asked the headmaster to ascend to the sky and go to the divine kingdom of Haotian together. Colorful flowers fell from the sky and shook the firmament. The headmaster and Sang Sang left there. The big black horse, the primordial 13 arrows and the big black umbrella in the black horse carriage also parted with him at the Sisui River. Ning Ke had sent people to search for them after that, but the big black horse was nowhere to be found in the wind by the Sisui River. The black horse carriage and the things in it had also disappeared. Today, one thing finally returned to the human world. Then what about the rest? The arrows? The umbrella? Where was the silly big black horse? The headmaster? And Sang Sang? Ning Ke's emotions were unstable. It took him a long time to calm down and focus on the reality. Who was it that wanted to return his things? Who was it that had the ability to find the drunkard and make him the messenger? Who is it? He looked at the drunkard and asked directly. The drunkard's response was also very direct. He did not answer. The headmaster was not in the human world. As long as he did not want to answer, no one could make him speak. The spring breeze brushed against Ning Ke's cheeks. It was not warm at all. Instead, it was extremely cold. Or maybe it was just his own body and mind that made the temperature of the spring breeze around him drop. At the Sisui River, he saw the headmaster ascending to the sky with Sang Sang. Then, the entrance of the divine kingdom of Haotian exploded and the sky was full of shooting stars. He was sure that Sang Sang was dead or had returned to the divine kingdom of Haotian. Either way, she was not in the human world anymore. If she was still here, he would have felt it. Then who took the big black horse? Who picked up the iron arrows? Who was holding the shabby big black umbrella in the human world? Who was returning the horse carriage to him? Why was it in the drunkard's hands? Ning Kai could not understand these things. Yesterday was the day that disturbed my mind. He looked up at the dim spring sun in the sky. After a moment of silence, he continued, "Why think about those who abandoned me?" Then, he looked at the drunkard and said, "Sir, please come in." It was extremely quiet in front of the southern city gate. As he said that, a tense atmosphere gushed out from the deepest part of the city wall and floated to the sky. The drunkard looked at the magnificent city wall of Chang'an and asked, "Why should I come in?" Ning Kai said, "Since I am a guest, there is no reason not to come in." The drunkard said, "As a bad guest, you should have the self-awareness not to enter the house." Ning Kai said, "A good guest and a bad guest are both guests. A guest should do as the host pleases." The drunkard found him very interesting and said with a smile, "Then I am not a guest." Ning Kai also smiled, but his real feeling was not like that. If he was not a guest, he was definitely an enemy. He looked at the drunkard and said seriously, "Since I am not entering the city, how can I return it to me?" The drunkard looked at him as if he was looking at a shameless child and said, "I am already so old and tired after such a long journey. Do I have to walk the last few steps by myself?" Ning Kai said, "Even if it is only a few steps, it is still not there." The drunkard said, "You can come out." Ning Kai said with a smile, "You can come in." The drunkard looked at the old modeled city wall of Chang'an again and said after a moment of silence, "Another day." Hearing this, Ning Kai said without hesitation, "Another day is better than another day." It was an invitation and also a gamble. To be more precise, he was gambling with his life. He was gambling with his life, the life of the entire Chang'an city, the life of the Tang Empire and the fate of the human world. This chapter is 2,000 words. I will write the next one. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.